Chapter 934. Lei Xingfeng turned back helplessly and said, Hurry up, hurry up. You have 6 true ring bodies. Why are you so slow? AI Yao was confused. He could not understand why Lei Xingfeng was so much faster than before. He could only try his best to catch up. Running with all his might was the right thing to do. Their footsteps were very loud. If one listened carefully, they would know that Lei Xingfeng's footsteps were relatively light. However, AI Yao's footsteps were a little scary. With every step, the ground would shake. The water on the ground would jump up. The faster they ran, the more restriction nodes they would touch. After accumulating to a certain point, the restriction would explode. However, Lei Xingfeng used a little trick. He was in front while AI Yao was behind. This way, the restriction nodes would touch Lei Xingfeng's true body. AI Yao behind him would not touch many restriction nodes. This could conceal their restriction array. Once the restriction exploded, its strength would be much weaker. The reaction of the restriction was related to the person who entered the restriction. It was like a foreign object entering the eye. The bigger the foreign object, the stronger the reaction. The two gradually went deeper. Suddenly, Lei Xingfeng stopped and said, From here. He turned and ran to the right. Moby, which also ran. After running for about an hour, suddenly, the dripping of rain fell. Moby, which said, Sigh, it's coming again. Lei Xingfeng said, Hurry up and run. Why are you thinking so much? AI Yao saw the water rise again. AI Yao said hatefully, I hate water. Lei Xingfeng did not care and continued to run. He had already seen a large number of restriction nodes piling up in the distance. That was the sign of someone forming a restriction. However, there were too many restriction nodes this time. It was so many that Lei Xingfeng was shocked. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng kept shouting, Hurry, run faster. There's a big guy coming out. AI Yao said, Don't shout, don't shout. I got it. I'm already running as fast as I can. Lei Xingfeng's shouting annoyed him so much that he couldn't help but shout. Lei Xingfeng said, The 4 people who came out before were not as strong as this one. Let's run as far as possible. Even if it chases after us, it's best if we can run to the cliff. We'll be safe there, so let's run faster. AI Yao gritted her teeth and said, We can't fly here. If we could fly, it wouldn't be so annoying. Lei Xingfeng said, If you want to die, then fly. If there wasn't a real body outside, they wouldn't be able to withstand any attack. Therefore, no one would foolishly withdraw their real body. Using their real body to fly would be an act of seeking death. The 2 of them, one in front and one behind, Lei Xingfeng ran very fast. The distance between him and AI Yao gradually increased. AI Yao even looked at Lei Xingfeng's huge back in despair. AI Yao was anxious and angry. He was anxious because he couldn't catch up. He was angry because he had 6 true ring bodies but couldn't outrun 4 true ring bodies. It was really frustrating. Lei Xingfeng ran all the way. He knew in his heart that it was almost impossible to run to the cliff. He would definitely be caught by the restriction formed by the restriction. However, he wanted to get closer to the cliff. Only then would he have a chance to leave. If he didn't reach the cliff and was stuck inside, he would have to pay a huge price to get out. As the restriction nodes gathered, the restriction began to take effect. A huge body gradually appeared. Even though Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao ran so far, they could still clearly see what was forming. AI Yao shouted, What the hell is that? It's not a restriction person. Lei Xingfeng looked back and said, That's a star python beast. That's the shape of a star python beast. This restriction formed a beast shape, not a human shape. The beast shape was always stronger than the human shape. Lei Xingfeng knew this very well. He said, There's only one. Only one. AI Yao said, I know, I saw it. There's only one. There was only one. The 2 of them let out a sigh of relief. If there were 2, it would be troublesome. Xi and Feng understood that the star python beasts formed by the restrictions here were completely different from the ones he had seen before. The star python beasts formed here should be stronger than AI Yao's 6th ring true body. Therefore, they had to run as far as possible and try not to fight it. If they could run to the cliff, they would be free. However, Lei Xingfeng knew that there was still some distance to the cliff. It was almost impossible to escape to the cliff before the restriction star beast formed. In other words, they would definitely encounter the restriction star beast and have to fight it. Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao both knew that this should be the restriction's strongest attack. Once it formed, it would not stop until one of them was dead. Of course, if they were at the cliff, the two had a chance to escape. The prerequisite was that they did not get entangled. The two did not hesitate to consume energy and ran faster. At this time, they could not conserve energy. The energy used to run and the energy used to fight were incomparable. They would rather spend more energy on running. They ran as fast as they could, but AI Yao was getting further and further away. The gap was huge. Lei Xingfeng had a headache. If AI Yao was entangled, he would have to turn back to save her. Lei Xingfeng suddenly had an idea. He stopped and shouted, "Come to me." AI Yao ran to Lei Xingfeng and said, "What's wrong?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Withdraw your true body." AI Yao said, "What?" He looked at Lei Xingfeng in shock. Lei Xingfeng said, "Why are you talking so much nonsense? Hurry up and withdraw your true body." AI Yao trusted Lei Xingfeng very much. During this journey, he could see that Lei Xingfeng was very trustworthy. He withdrew his true body and saw Lei Xingfeng sweeping a palm at him. He was so scared that he screamed. He would really be slapped to death. Lei Xingfeng grabbed AI Yao and ran. As he ran, he said, "I will carry you." AI Yao's anger was gone. His face was flushed red. He had lost too much face. He was despised by Lei Xingfeng to the point of death. Lei Xingfeng didn't care about AI Yao's face. His life was more important. Unless he had no other choice, he didn't want to fight with this star beast. This star beast that was created by the restriction wasn't a real star beast. It was a restriction weapon. If the carrier was a human, it would be a human-shaped restriction weapon. If the star beast was a restriction weapon, it would be a restriction weapon in the shape of a star beast. If it was a real star beast, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't even run. He would just go up and kill it. Lei Xingfeng knew the combat strength of a star beast. They weren't a match for cultivators. And this star beast was a restriction product. Its strength was given by the restriction. Therefore, if the restriction was strong, the star beast would be strong. If the restriction was weak, the star beast would be weak. It had nothing to do with a real star beast. This was why Lei Xingfeng was running for his life. According to Lei Xingfeng's estimation, this restriction star beast might have the strength of a 6th ring true body. It might even have the strength of a 7th ring true body. In any case, he didn't want to fight with such a star beast. As he ran, he looked back. Even though he had run very far, he could still clearly see the shell of the star beast. In the rain, it was like a crouching dragon on the ground. Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but clench his fists. AI Yao screamed, "Why, you want to kill me? How could the strength of the main body compare to the true body?" Therefore, when Lei Xingfeng clenched his fists slightly, AI Yao almost vomited blood. He screamed. Lei Xingfeng instantly woke up and quickly relaxed his fists. He said, Sorry, I forgot. You were in my hands." These words made AI Yao want to cry. It hurt her pride too much. Continuing to run forward, Lei Xingfeng couldn't wait to retract his true body and fly over. However, he knew that his main body couldn't withstand the restriction's attack. And AI Yao was in Lei Xingfeng's hands, so she was protected very well. She wouldn't be in any danger. After running for about 10 minutes, he heard a faint roar behind him. Countless water droplets jumped up from the surface of the water. The shock wave quickly spread. AI Yao was about to vomit from Lei Xingfeng's shaking. One had to know that when Lei Xingfeng ran forward, his two arms were swinging like wind and fire wheels. AI Yao was in front of the swinging arms. It was as if she was sitting on a huge swing. Not only was her swinging powerful, but she was also very fast. Xian Feng then heard Moina's cries. These cries were very enchanting. Ah, 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 causing black lines to appear on Xian Feng's forehead. He roared, "Stop screaming. It's so unpleasant." AI Yao couldn't help but scold. "Bastard, you want to try? You will definitely scream louder than me." Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "Who asked you to run so slowly? You can't blame me." The torrential rain was getting heavier. Lei Xingfeng ran with all his might. The roars behind him were getting louder. He knew that the astral beast was about to complete its transformation. Lei Xingfeng ran while observing. He didn't dare to run recklessly. He had carefully chosen his route to avoid triggering the restriction as much as possible. The restriction's counterattack would also be weaker. Now that he had provoked a restriction astral beast, he believed that if he ran recklessly, it wouldn't be strange to provoke 2 or even 3 restriction astral beasts. Lei Xingfeng was actually very satisfied that only 1 restriction astral beast had appeared. However, he didn't want to fight with such a restriction astral beast. It would be best if he could avoid it. If he couldn't, it wouldn't be too late to fight. Moreover, it would be best if the location of the battle was near the cliff. This way, if there were any accidents, he could escape to the next layer of restriction in time. Suddenly, the astral beast's roars stopped. Lei Xingfeng looked back. Silver light flickered in his eyes. He instantly saw the astral beast that had already set off. He said in a deep voice, "It is indeed the aqua astral python." The water rose again. Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but curse. The more water there was, the more advantageous it was for the aqua astral python. However, it was extremely disadvantageous for Lei Xingfeng. The more water there was, the slower Lei Xingfeng ran. When the water was below his knees, he could still run with big strides. However, when the water reached his waist, he couldn't run. He could only wade in the water slowly. Lei Xingfeng started to look around. He needed a bigger rock. He wasn't stupid enough to fight the aqua astral python in the water. He had to take advantage of the terrain. Otherwise, he would be at a disadvantage. Chapter 9:35. The mercury python was a snake-shaped astral beast. However, its body shape was different from snakes. It had 2 fin-like forelimbs, and the middle of its body was flat, like a flattened spindle. This creature was extremely nimble in the water, and its speed was frighteningly fast. If Lei Xingfeng hadn't been sprinting and distancing himself from the mercury python, the mercury python would have needed some time to catch up. Lei Xingfeng was in a hurry to find a large rocky area. Even if he couldn't reach the cliff, he had to find the rocky area first. When fighting against the mercury python in the water, it was already considered impressive if one could use 50% of one's strength. There was already a slight difference between their strength and the mercury pythons. However, in the water, even Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao couldn't fight against the mercury python. AI Yao couldn't swim, so she couldn't use her full strength. Lei Xingfeng had already found a large rocky area. It was just that it was a bit far away from the cliff. He didn't dare to hesitate and immediately headed towards the rocky area. Soon, the water rose to Lei Xingfeng's neck, forcing him to start swimming. This actually increased his speed. AI Yao was no longer in Lei Xingfeng's hands. Instead, she was bitten in his mouth. The mouth of his real body was actually a pit. It wasn't a real mouth. The real body didn't need to breathe. Once Lei Xingfeng started swimming, his speed instantly increased. Although he couldn't match the mercury python's speed, he was confident that the mercury python wouldn't catch up to him before he reached the rocky area. The mercury python behind him could be seen clearly. Lei Xingfeng also climbed up the rocky area. This rocky area was quite high, so Lei Xingfeng needed to climb up. He opened his mouth and spat. Pooey! AI Yao fell down. Before he landed, he had already released his real body. He stood on the ground and said, "Brat, how can you spit me out like this?" Lei Xingfeng said, "What's there to complain about? You're a 6-ringed expert, yet you're shameless enough to let a 4-ringed brat like me protect you." AI Yao was speechless. That was true, but the process had nothing to do with strength. He couldn't swim and couldn't run fast, but everyone was the same. Which 6th-ring true body cultivator could run faster than him? Only a freak like Lei Xingfeng knew how to swim and knew how to use restrictions. What puzzled AI Yao the most was that he could run much faster than her. This was too F***ing infuriating. The two of them did not dare to stop at the edge of the rocky area. Instead, they ran towards the center of the rocky area. As long as there was no water around, the aqua python would not be able to unleash its full strength. Only then would they be able to gain the upper hand in the battle. Lei Xingfeng was clear about this, and so was AI Yao. The rocky area was not made up of complete rocks. Instead, countless rocks were piled up on the ground in a crisscrossing pattern. The ground was also filled with gullies, and streams of water flowed through the cracks between the rocks. The environment was rather vile, but Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao were very satisfied. At least they could step on solid ground. Even if they had to fight, they were confident. The two of them retreated to the center of the rocky area. AI Yao asked, "How do we fight?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Let's figure out the aqua python's strength first, then we'll think about other things." If they could combine their strength and kill the aqua python, then there would be no problem. If they couldn't defeat the aqua python, then they would have to think of other ways. The rocky area was not very big. It was only 3 or 4 square kilometers, but it was enough to lure the aqua python onto the shore. This aqua python was not a real astral beast, but a creature created by restrictions. Its mission was to kill Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao. Hence, it did not delay and directly climbed onto the rocky area from the water. Lei Xingfeng was instantly delighted. He said, "Very good. A simple-minded creature is always easier to deal with than one with intelligence." AI Yao did not understand. He asked, "What do you mean, simple-minded?" Lei Xingfeng said, "If you were that aqua python, would you climb up?" AI Yao said, "Of course not. I'll wait for you in the water. You're the ones who are anxious. I'm not." Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "But it climbed up." AI Yao looked at the aqua python clumsily climbing up the rocks and said, "It seems to be a little simple-minded." When the aqua python climbed onto the rocks, Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao both had a headache. This thing was not easy to deal with. It was too big. If they were in the water, Lei Xingfeng felt that he would immediately activate the mirror realm and escape. There is a big difference between an astral beast created by restrictions and a real astral beast. Astral beasts did not have many weaknesses. For example, Lei Xingfeng liked to break the necks of astral beasts. However, an aqua python created by restrictions did not have this weakness. Even if you broke its neck, it would quickly recover. This thing had to be destroyed. This meant that your attack would instantly exceed its defense. Once it was destroyed, it would not be able to recover unless another one was created. AI Yao looked at the huge aqua python and said, "How do we fight it?" Lei Xingfeng also had a headache. He also did not know how powerful this thing was. He said, "You try first. I'll support you from his side." AI Yao was not confident. He said, "Why should I try?" Lei Xingfeng said in annoyance, "Hey, old AI, are you crazy again? You're a 6-ringed expert. Are you going to let me, a 4-ringed true ring expert, go?" AI Yao said, "Your 4-ringed true ring is much stronger than my 6-ringed true ring." Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't talk nonsense. Let's fight it." AI Yao knew that he could only do it himself. After all, he was stronger than Lei Xingfeng. This was hard power. The aqua python swam up on the surface of the rock, but its movements were obviously much clumsier. It was not as agile as it was in the water. The aqua python's attacks were mainly about strangling. As long as one was entangled, if one was weaker than the aqua python's real body would explode. This was the aqua python's most powerful attack. Its other attacks were very ordinary. For example, the whip of its tail, the ram of its huge head, or the bite. But after leaving the water, these attacks were not very powerful. Ever since AI Yao advanced to 6-ring true ring, he had become very bold. But ever since he entered Nameless Peak, he became more and more timid. At this point, he was already very timid. When he fought, he did not have the courage. He also knew that Lei Xingfeng was right. Of the two of them, only he could fight. There was no reason to let Lei Xingfeng go first. Hence, he charged towards the aqua python. In an instant, the aqua python's head and a small part of its body stood up. This time, it was about the same height as AI Yao. It let out a threatening growl and opened its mouth, revealing its dense set of teeth. Lei Xingfeng observed from afar. He could not help but sigh. The aqua python formed by the restriction was really amazing. Even though he had never seen an aqua python before, he felt that this was how a real aqua python looked like. Boom! AI Yao directly sent himself flying back. The aqua python's head shook rapidly. If not for its huge body, the aqua python would have been sent flying. Lei Xingfeng was slightly shocked. He recognized that the aqua python's strength was comparable to AI Yao's on land. If they were in the water, AI Yao would not be a match for the aqua python. In other words, the aqua python's strength in the water was comparable to a seven-ringed true ring. Even if AI Yi and Lei Xingfeng worked together, they would not be a match for it in the water. AI Yao's face turned pale. He was not stupid. He understood after the collision. If they were on the rocks, he might be able to survive. If they were in the water, he would be dead for sure. AI Yao did not go forward. Instead, he continued to retreat. Soon, he reached Lei Xingfeng's side. He said, "We have to work together." Lei Xingfeng smiled bitterly and said, "Work together, my ass. I can't even move its body. What's the difference between one more or one less?" AI Yao said anxiously, "But I can't deal with it alone. It's very, very strong." Lei Xingfeng stared at the aqua python and said, "Nonsense. It's almost a seven-ringed true ring. Of course it's very strong, but if it's on land, you should still be able to deal with it." AI Yao said, "It's useless to deal with it. We have to kill it." Lei Xingfeng said, "Can we kill it if we work together?" AI Yao said no. He knew very well that they could not kill this aqua python if they worked together. Lei Xingfeng said, "Then what's the use of me going up?" AI Yao said strangely, "But you can't let me fight alone." Lei Xingfeng said, "You can only fight alone. If I join you, you won't have any hope of escaping." AI Yao was not stupid. He understood that there was a hidden meaning in his words. He asked, "What do you mean?" Lei Xingfeng said, "You go up and deal with it first. I'll think of another way. Otherwise, we won't be able to escape." Actually, he could escape, but at this point, he could not bear to do so. AI Yao said, "Okay, I'll go and deal with it. I hope you can find a solution quickly." Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "Go. I'll think of a way to escape together." AI Yao braced himself and rushed up again. This time, he collided with the python. Only by colliding would he have enough momentum to stop the aqua python from entangling him. Boom! The man and the python collided again. This time, AI Yao was not sent flying. Instead, he retreated with big steps, leaving huge footprints on the hard rock. AI Yao said, "A phone, give me your weapon." Lei Xingfeng raised his hand and threw out the steel rod. The huge steel rod made a humming sound. AI Yao grabbed it. This time, he did not collide with the python. Instead, he held the thick steel rod and started smashing it at the aqua python. This thick steel rod could prevent the aqua python from entangling his real body. Lei Xingfeng quickly ran around the edge of the rock. He carefully observed the terrain. Meanwhile, AI Yao and the aqua python fought until water splashed everywhere. Loud explosions shook the ground. Chapter 9:36. They had only fought for a few minutes, but Moa Demon was already complaining. This thing was very powerful. Its defense was very strong, and its attack power was not bad either. At the very least, its attack power was about the same as Moa Demon's, but its defense was better than Moa Demon's real body. Moa Demon was at a disadvantage. Lei Xingfeng kept moving around the intersection between the rock and the water. Moa Demon did not know what he was doing. Moa Demon was in great pain. What made him feel the most hopeless was that he knew that the Mercury Python might not be able to defeat him, but he could not kill the Mercury Python either. The consequences made him shudder. He could not kill his opponent, but he could not leave either. The Mercury Python was created by the restriction array. If he wanted to exhaust it to death, he would have to destroy the entire restriction array. Therefore, as long as the restriction array was still operating, Moa Demon could not exhaust the Mercury Python to death. On the other hand, if Moa Demon could not exhaust the Mercury Python to death, then the Mercury Python might exhaust Moa Demon to death. Although Moa Demon had obtained many energy crystals from Lei Xingfeng, They were limited and could not support him for a long time. Moa Demon shouted, "A phone, what are you doing? Come and help me." Lei Xingfeng said impatiently, "Stall it. I am thinking of a way." It was useless to have another Lei Xingfeng. Even Moa Demon could not break through the Mercury Python's defense. Lei Xingfeng could not break through its defense either. Instead of fighting in vain, it was better to think of another way. Moa Demon had no choice but to continue fighting with the Mercury Python. After failing to break through the opponent's defense, Moa Demon did not waste his energy anymore. Instead, he used a wandering method to maintain a balanced battle. After all, he just had to stall the Mercury Python. This way, Moa Demon could finally relax a little. He shouted, "A phone, hurry up and think of a way. I can't stall it for long." Lei Xingfeng shouted, "Stall it even if you can't." Then he said, "Before I think of a way, you have to stall it for me." Moa Demon was about to cry. He said, "Can you be reasonable? This thing is too strong. I really can't drag it out any longer." Lei Xingfeng no longer paid any attention to him. He was considering whether or not to set up a restriction. Setting up a restriction in a restriction formation was a very difficult thing to do. It was like trying to occupy a room in someone else's house, and the owner didn't object. It was very difficult. In other words, if he wanted to set up this restriction, he had to coordinate it with the entire grand restriction formation. In other words, he had to deceive the grand formation and mislead it into thinking that it was a part of the grand formation. It was just like seizing someone else's room. If you were a stranger, you would definitely be chased away. However, if you were a relative or an elder of the family, you would have a chance. Lei Xingfeng was thinking about how to set up a restriction so that the restriction formation would mistake them as a family. This was the most difficult part to deal with. So, Lei Xingfeng was going around in circles. He actually already had a plan, but he needed time to sort it out. After a while, Lei Xingfeng shouted, "Old Moa, lure the aqua star python to the center of the rocky area. Make it completely leave the water." One had to know that the aqua star python still had a section of its tail in the water. It didn't seem to be willing to come ashore. Actually, this was a special characteristic of the aqua star python. As long as there was a section of its body in the water, no matter how much it was attacked, it would be replenished by the restriction formation. Moa Demon felt bitter. At this moment, he could only listen to Lei Xingfeng's orders and do his best to lure the aqua star python out. He attacked crazily and retreated bit by bit. Gradually, the aqua star python gained the upper hand. Lei Xingfeng was secretly impressed. Moa Demon's methods were indeed good. He seemed to be at his limit. As long as the aqua star python put in more effort, it would be able to kill him. Therefore, the aqua star python left the water and slowly swam towards the center of the rocky area. Moa Demon retreated step by step and finally lured the aqua star python to the center of the rocky area. Lei Xingfeng also started to move. He had already thought it through. Even if the two of them worked together, it would still be very difficult to kill the aqua star python. Moreover, killing the aqua star python wasn't a good idea. Looking at the changes in the restriction formation, if this aqua star python was killed, the restriction formation might regenerate. Next time, it might not be one aqua star python, but 2 or even 3 aqua star pythons. At that time, they would really be courting death. Therefore, the countermeasure was to trap the aqua star python and then escape to the cliff. Only by crossing this restriction would they be able to escape. Therefore, the restriction that Lei Xingfeng set up was relatively simple. It was an illusion formation. This illusion formation had to not clash with the entire restriction formation. Therefore, a bit of spatial restriction had to be added into the illusion formation. Fortunately, when they entered the formation, they had already broken the illusion formation within the restriction formation. This way, the additional illusion formation would have a chance to cause the restriction formation here to not be able to recognize this illusion formation. This illusion formation had to have 30% of the original illusion formation's charm. Simply put, this illusion formation would cause the original restriction formation to think that it was its own illusion formation. However, this was far from enough. The restriction formation would tolerate this illusion formation because it had similarities with the original illusion formation. However, this illusion formation with similarities wouldn't be able to trap the aqua star python. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng had to add in spatial restrictions. This was the key to truly trapping the aqua star python. Spatial restrictions were very mysterious. If Lei Xingfeng didn't obtain the spatial fei, Lil Kong, he wouldn't have a deep understanding of spatial restrictions. Of course, he wouldn't be able to set up spatial restrictions. Right now, he indeed had the ability to do so. AI Yao lured the aqua star python to the center of the boulder. He noticed that the aqua star python was much weaker, which gave him some confidence. He shouted, "Afeng, how long do you need?" Lei Xingfeng said, "As long as you can. I need time to set up the restrictions." AI Yao shouted, "Brother, you have to hurry up. I don't know how long I can last here. This thing is too hard to fight." Lei Xingfeng said, "Hold on. As long as you can hold on until I finish setting up the restrictions, we will be able to escape." AI Yao said, "The energy consumption is too great. I'm afraid that I won't have enough energy in the end." Lei Xingfeng said, "It's fine. I have energy. The energy you use will be split equally between us." AI Yao was instantly energized. Actually, he wasn't afraid of the aqua star python. It was just that the energy consumption was too painful. If he didn't get a portion of it from Lei Xingfeng, his energy reserve would have been depleted long ago. With Lei Xingfeng's promise, he dared to let loose a little. As long as he wasn't afraid of using up his energy, AI Yao wouldn't be any weaker than the aqua star python. Of course, it was almost impossible for him to kill the aqua star python. If they were in the water, AI Yao wouldn't stand a chance. Not to mention defeating the aqua star python, he wouldn't even be able to confront it. According to Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao's estimation, the aqua star python's strength in the water was guaranteed to be at the 7-ring sage body. AI Yao was one level below it, let alone Lei Xingfeng. Setting up restrictions quickly was Lei Xingfeng's specialty. The only reason he slowed down was because he added spatial restrictions. Due to the complexity of spatial restrictions, even adding a little bit of spatial restrictions was enough to make Lei Xingfeng choke. AI Yao didn't dare to clash head-on with the aqua star python anymore. He had seen Lei Xingfeng's battle and tasted Lei Xingfeng's agility in battle. Therefore, he had secretly learned a lot. It wasn't the battle moves, but the battle thinking. This was a great help to him. According to his previous battle experience, if it was a few years ago, he would definitely fight head-on with his life. But now he wouldn't do that. Instead, he would constantly move around. Unless he had no other choice, he wouldn't fight head-on. This gave him many opportunities to stall the aqua star python, moving around and seizing the opportunity to launch a sudden attack. The more he fought, the more excited AI Yao became. Gradually, he became more and more interested in fighting. It turned out that he could fight to his heart's content without having to fight head-on. Actually, if he didn't have to fight head-on, he would consume much less energy. This way, he would be able to last longer. Lei Xingfeng was also nervously setting up restrictions. He now had a new method of setting up restrictions. That was to use Lei Yin's restrictions to project them outside. The cost of materials was only 1/10 of the original cost. However, the energy consumption was double. This was a high-level spatial restriction technique. It was a gift from Shao Kong. It could save a lot of materials. Moreover, this method of setting up the array was moderately fast. Going around the boundary between the rock and the water, he set it up all the way. After one round, the entire restriction was set up. Even if AI Yao was moving around, he couldn't take it anymore. This period of time wasn't long, but it wasn't short either. It was more than 2 hours, and he had used up a lot of energy. AI Yao wailed and howled. "It's about time, right? Is it enough? I can't take it anymore." Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but laugh. He said, "All right, run towards me. Hurry up." Before he finished speaking, AI Yao ran towards Lei Xingfeng without hesitation. The aqua astral python chased after him. This rock area wasn't very big. It didn't take long for AI Yao to reach Lei Xingfeng. What he didn't understand was that Lei Xingfeng was standing there calmly with a smile on his face. AI Yao shouted, "He's here." Lei Xingfeng said, "I know." Just as he finished speaking, the scenery in front of AI Yao changed. He was surrounded by an endless shoal. The water was 1 foot high, and the ground was full of gravel. There was no movement in the surroundings. It was as if the world was still. Even the aqua astral python chasing behind him had disappeared. AI Yao heard a voice in his ear. "Take 3 steps to the left, then take 7 steps back." That was Lei Xingfeng's voice. AI Yao understood immediately. He obediently followed Lei Xingfeng's instructions. 3 steps to the left, 7 steps back. Then, he heard Lei Xingfeng say, "Take 2 steps forward." AI Yao was still confused. Why didn't he take 7 steps back? Couldn't he just take 5 steps back? However, he didn't dare to question it. He obediently took 2 steps forward and saw Lei Xingfeng. The surrounding scenery returned. AI Yao found himself standing at the edge of the rock area. He almost stepped into the water. Chapter 9:37. AI Yao said, "It's scary." As he spoke, he turned around to look. From outside, he could clearly see the aqua star python spinning around on the spot. It was like a millstone that kept circling around. It looked like it was chasing its own tail. Lei Xingfeng said, "It's still chasing you, but it doesn't know that it's actually chasing its own tail." AI Yao exclaimed, "Won't it never be able to catch up then?" Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "Of course. It can't catch up, but we've already escaped far away." AI Yao said, "Let's hurry up and run." Lei Xingfeng said, "There's no need to rush now. I have to choose a suitable path to run. If we run like this, we might provoke another restriction person or restriction astral beast. That would be troublesome." The mechanism of the restriction was in the restriction nodes. These things were like sensors. The more they were touched, the greater the reaction of the restriction. Therefore, they had to choose a path with fewer restriction nodes to reduce the intensity of the restriction's reaction. AI Yao said, "Let's hurry up. I'm afraid that the mercury python will break through the restriction and we won't have time to escape." Lei Xingfeng said, "My restriction is combined with the big restriction. The mercury python can't escape at all. However, if someone enters, it'll be fun." AI Yao said, "Who can come here? Forget it. Let's not bother about this. Let's get out of here as soon as possible." Lei Xingfeng also found a path out. He said, "Follow me." The rain suddenly became lighter. After the mercury python was trapped in the illusion array, the rain started to weaken. After entering the water reached their shoulders. It was quite a hindrance for the two of them. Lei Xingfeng was in front, and AI Yao was behind. The two of them didn't walk very fast. After all, there was water blocking them. This time, the two of them were calm and collected. They walked in the water at a moderate pace. Gradually, the water level started to decrease. After walking for more than an hour, the water level had dropped to their waist. The two of them walked much faster. AI Yao looked back. Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't look anymore. We can't see the rocky area anymore." AI Yao smiled bitterly. That star python had left a deep impression on him. What a terrifying restriction formation. After this waterfall restriction formation, we will definitely not be able to reach the next restriction formation. No matter how much we gain, we have to leave heavenly paradise. It's already too difficult for us to get through here. Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "Yes, this restriction is too difficult. Moreover, the restrictions here are too complicated. I still need to learn and absorb them. Maybe in a few years, the restrictions here will be useless to me." AI Yao said, "I believe that. With your level of restriction mastery, you will be able to pass by yourself in the future." Lei Xingfeng shook his head and said, "If you're not strong enough, it's still a bit dangerous." AI Yao said, "It's just a little dangerous. I'm still confident that I can make it through." Lei Xingfeng said, "Of course. Otherwise, what's the point of learning restrictions? I just need to be able to use it." He waved his hand arrogantly. This was the wisest choice he had made in his life. No, it was the wisest choice he had made in both of his lives. In this world, Lei Xingfeng finally realized that the restrictions were his biggest discovery. It was also the thing that interested him the most after he came into contact with them. It was just like when he first discovered the existence of cultivators. It gave him a dreamy feeling. The two of them waded through the water and finally arrived at the cliff. AI Yao sighed and said, "Oh my God, we finally see the cliff. I hope it will end soon. I'm really scared of restrictions." After crossing the cliff, the two of them arrived at another world. Of course, it was still the water world. The expected attack did not appear. Lei Xingfeng was slightly surprised. He observed for a moment and realized that the illusory array and spatial restriction he added had actually caused problems in the operation of the entire Great Array. A restriction Great Array was interconnected. However, when Lei Xingfeng added in some restrictions, it messed up the entire restriction. The worst thing was that the restrictions added by Lei Xingfeng were somewhat similar to the entire restriction Great Array. In other words, when the restrictions appeared, they were integrated into the entire restriction Great Array. However, they were not a part of the Great Array. After operating for a while, the entire restriction Great Array began to reject them. However, the restriction Great Array merged with a part of the restrictions, causing chaos. Once the restriction Great Array was in chaos, it gave Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao a great opportunity. Using this opportunity, the two of them could quickly pass through the Great Array. Lei Xingfeng grasped this opportunity. Once he noticed the problem, he immediately brought AI Yao and ran forward with all their might. The path they took was no longer the original path they chose. It was a straight line. No matter how many restriction nodes they bumped into, the restriction Great Array had no time to deal with them. This was because there was an even greater danger, which was the illusory array set up by Lei Xingfeng. This gave Lei Xingfeng a great deal of inspiration. It turned out that setting up such a restriction could actually cause the entire Great Array to malfunction. Even if the restriction was not completely ineffective, it would allow the two of them to move freely. This was their only chance. Lei Xingfeng understood that the illusory array he set up was projected by Lei Yin. If it wasn't for the existence of the spatial restriction, it would have been directly crushed by the Great Array. However, with the mystical spatial restriction, its resistance was greatly increased. It would still take some time for the Great Array to crush it. This time was the opportunity for him and AI Yao to escape. In fact, Lei Xingfeng had already noticed that this restriction Great Array could be said to be the most dangerous restriction he had ever seen. If he and AI Yao tried to force their way through, it would be almost impossible for them to break through. When he saw the battle between the Aquastar Python and AI Yao, he understood that even if he joined in, they would still be exhausted to death by the Aquastar Python. Even if the Aquastar Python couldn't unleash 100% of its strength, there wouldn't be any difference in the outcome. It was just a matter of time. By relying on this illusory array restriction to trap the Aquastar Python, it also gave the two of them a chance of survival. Furthermore, Lei Xingfeng already understood that after crossing the cliff, the power of the restriction would double. The closer they got to the end, the weaker their ability to deal with it. If they didn't want to die in this restriction, then they had to leave as soon as possible. As he ran, he explained to AI Yao. AI Yao also understood that this was their biggest and final chance. If they couldn't escape, then it would really be troublesome. After half a day, the two of them saw the cliff. Lei Xingfeng let out a sigh of relief and said, "The last checkpoint. Let's go." The two of them stepped over the cliff. The current here was even more turbulent. Even though the two of them were relying on the huge weight of their true bodies were still shaken by the torrential current. Lei Xingfeng had already grasped the secret of the true body's weight. Therefore, his true body instantly became heavier. Lei Xingfeng said, "Let's run. If we can get out of here before the restriction array can react, then we will win." The two of them ran forward crazily. Lei Xingfeng shouted as he ran, "Don't waste your energy. You can save a lot of energy if you use it now." Once the restriction array reacted, no matter what appeared to stop them, the two of them would definitely use up a lot of energy. It was better to use up more energy now to run faster. The two of them ran crazily, one in front and one behind. Then they saw a shocking scene. Along the way, huge lumps of light would appear from time to time. It was the sign of a restriction human or restriction astral beast. However, as soon as the lumps of light appeared, they would suddenly shatter. Lei Xingfeng was still in the mood to explain. The energy supply is insufficient. Problems keep appearing along the way. Therefore, the restriction humans or restriction astral beasts or anything else can't be born normally. AI Yao said with fear. Along the way, I have seen at least 17 lumps. If they come from the breeding area, we are done for. Lei Xingfeng said, no, they're not being born at the same time. However, there are at most 4 of them here. Because they keep disappearing, they keep on being born. It's just that they can't be born. AI Yao said, let alone 4. Even if there's only 1, the 2 of them wouldn't be able to deal with it. Therefore, running faster was the only choice. Mobilizing the energy in the seal, Lei Xingfeng's huge body became heavier for stability. When he ran, he needed a lot of energy. He didn't want to conserve it at all. Running consumed less energy than fighting. The 2 of them had a clear understanding of this. Lei Xingfeng could see through the restriction array. He knew that they were about to reach the edge of the restriction array. This time, it was the edge of the large restriction array. As long as they crossed the edge of the restriction array, they would pass the large restriction array. He shouted, Old AI, come on, we are about to cross it. AI Yao's heart was still aching about the energy he had used. In order to keep up with Lei Xingfeng, he didn't hesitate to use the last of his reserves. Once a battle broke out, he would really be in trouble. Without energy, it was like a car without oil or electrical appliances without electricity. There was nothing he could do. This was also AI Yao's only thought. If he didn't succeed, he would be done for. When the 2 of them were about to reach the edge, they realized that the lumps were getting bigger and bigger. Some of them had already formed, but in the end, they suddenly shattered. It was still the effect of Lei Xingfeng's illusion array. It was very obvious that the effect of the illusion array was gradually weakening. It was estimated that after a while, the entire illusion array would collapse. Once it collapsed, the large restriction array would be able to focus on dealing with the 2 of them. Lei Xingfeng understood this better than anyone else. Therefore, he ran like crazy. At the same time, he shouted for AI Yao to run as fast as he could. As long as they got out, everything would be fine. Finally, before the large restriction array completely recovered, the 2 of them rushed out of the large restriction array. The 2 of them simultaneously withdrew their true forms. Their huge true forms suddenly disappeared. The 2 of them weren't far from each other. Their hands were on their knees, and they were panting heavily. That feeling of crisis that was about to erupt was driving them crazy. When the 2 of them rushed out of the large restriction array and looked back, the surrounding scenery had completely changed. The rumbling sound of water was still there, but there was no water behind them. The 2 of them were standing at the top of the waterfall on a huge rock. Chapter 9:38. AI Yao held his knees and tilted his head to look back. After a while, he said, This is the first time I've run so pathetically after reaching 6 ring. You don't know, but I feel like my speed is greatly increasing. In the future, perhaps my escape speed will completely change. AI Yao didn't know why his running speed had changed. Lei Xingfeng knew that this kind of reckless running must have triggered the growth of restrictions in the seal. In other words, there must be restrictions that helped running and had already grown. This wasn't good for AI Yao. It wasn't that the added restrictions weren't good, but these restrictions weren't helpful to AI Yao's restrictions at all. They also occupied the most precious space in his seal. Lei Xingfeng's Lei Yin also had such restrictions growing. Lei Xingfeng purposely kept them and didn't erase them. He always felt that these restrictions were what he needed. If he couldn't win, he would have to run. If he could run faster, his chances of survival would be higher than others. Of course, Lei Xingfeng didn't have time to care about the newly added restrictions in Lei Yin. He looked at the surrounding terrain. This was a river that was a few hundred meters wide. It flowed through the canyon and formed a huge waterfall along the cliff. This canyon was also huge. However, the rock they were standing on wasn't big. It was like a crouching cow rock. The exposed part of the water wasn't big either. It was only about 300 square meters. There were torrents all around. This was a huge rock in the middle of the river. The two stood on it. Lei Xingfeng sat down and said, "Let's rest. I'm too tired." AI Yao said weakly, "I almost lost my life." Lei Xingfeng said, "Do you still dare to try the next restriction formation?" AI Yao said, "No. I might dare to try if I reach 7-ring true body. But now forget it. This restriction formation almost took my life. I'm not that stupid." Lei Xingfeng nodded, and I don't dare to try anymore. This restriction formation is the strongest I've ever seen. The next one will be even stronger. AI Yao said, "Let's eat something." Lei Xingfeng nodded. If it wasn't for Magi, he would have returned to the mirror world. After all, Fatty was here. It would be more comfortable to eat at home. However, since Maga was here, he decided against it. He took out a pile of food, and the two of them started eating. AI Yao said, "I wonder if the restriction array has been restored." Lei Xingfeng looked back for a moment and said, "It has been restored. However, it will be difficult for the entire formation to return to its original rhythm. The restriction that I added is not so easy to remove." The illusory array had long collapsed, but the spatial restriction wasn't so easy to collapse. The entire array was operating like an engine rotor. Lei Xingfeng was equivalent to sprinkling a handful of sand inside. It would be very difficult to restore the original level of tacit understanding. AI Yao said, "If that's the case, then doesn't that mean that if someone tries to force their way through this restriction again, their power won't be as great as when we came in?" Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "That's right. However, if you don't have 7 true ring bodies, the consequences won't be good. Each restriction is stronger than the previous one. Without a certain level of experience and strength, it's normal to die inside." AI Yao said, "No one will break in." Lei Xingfeng said, "Why won't anyone break in?" AI Yao said, "Each person has their own path. Unless you walk randomly, you won't meet." Lei Xingfeng curled his lips and said, "Nonsense, didn't I see you?" AI Yao said, "You're not walking the right path. You're interfering with me." Lei Xingfeng said, "You're the one who's not walking the right path. I'm walking the right path." AI Yao grabbed a large piece of braised bull meat and ate it in big bites. He said, "Stop arguing. You're right. Everything is right. Hey, why is this meat so delicious? Did you cook it?" Lei Xingfeng said, "If it's delicious, then eat more. Why do you care who cooked it?" He couldn't say that someone else cooked it. He had been in Sky Paradise for so long. Where else could he find meat cooked by someone else? AI Yao said, "What meat is this? It's so delicious. In my life, this is the first time I've eaten such delicious meat." Lei Xingfeng said, "I'll give you a few buckets of this meat later." AI Yao immediately smiled and said, Okay. Is it enough for you? If it's not enough, give me less, He felt embarrassed. It was the first time he had eaten something so delicious. Lei Xingfeng said, "What's there to be enough? If you like it, I'll give you more. It's not something very precious." AI Yao didn't care. After all, it was just food. As the time they spent together increased, the relationship between the two gradually became harmonious. The tacit understanding formed during the battle made the two gradually become familiar with each other. And once the two became familiar, they felt like friends. Lei Xingfeng suddenly thought of a problem and said, "How do we go back?" AI Yao said, "I don't know either." Lei Xingfeng was stunned. He said, "Do we have to go back through the restriction array again?" AI Yao said, "How is that possible? I won't go back. That thing is too torturous." "Oh, there should be a teleportation back." Lei Xingfeng said, "There will be a teleportation?" AI Yao wasn't confident at all. After all, it was his first time going to this extent. He didn't know the secret. He said, I'm just guessing." In fact, Lei Xingfeng didn't care. He had the mirror realm to go in and out. It was just that he didn't have a suitable reason to leave. Lei Xingfeng still wanted to go to a few more places in Nameless Peak. Anyway, there were ready-made cannon fodder. It was better than going alone. After the two separated, Lei Xingfeng could go in and out of this place as he pleased. He could even bring people in. Of course, Lei Xingfeng knew that without a certain level of strength, it was better not to come in. Who knew what dangers they would encounter? It would be too late to save them. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng temporarily gave up on the idea of bringing people in. He said, "I'm almost done eating. This food is for you." As he said that, he waved his hand. In an instant, 3 or 4 large wooden barrels appeared on the ground. They were all braised bull beef prepared by Fatty. AI Yao didn't refuse. He really liked it. He put the barrels into his hidden loon space and said, "Okay, let's go." Lei Xingfeng said, "Let's go to the shore first and then walk along the river bank." AI Yao said, "Okay, I'll fly over first." Lei Xingfeng nodded. "Try your best to fly along the river." Moa Demon responded and flew up. As expected, he flew along the river towards the bank. In a few breaths, he reached the opposite bank. Xi and Feng followed closely behind, following him to the riverbank. The riverbank and the cliff were only 10 meters long. If Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao released their true bodies, it would only be enough for them to walk side by side. It might even be a little crowded. Therefore, the two of them didn't release their true bodies and continued to use their true bodies. However, the two of them released their Lei Yin on top of their heads. If anything happened, their true bodies would appear in an instant. Walking along the riverbank, Lei Xingfeng had already started to pay attention to whether there were any materials or minerals around. However, when he walked down, he was shocked to find that there was nothing. It was clean. It wasn't the kind that was hollowed out. There was nothing at all. How is this possible? AI Yao noticed that Lei Xingfeng's expression was very bad. He said, "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" Lei Xingfeng said, "There are no resources here." AI Yao said in disbelief, "Impossible." Lei Xingfeng said, "This area is always like this. Will there be any if we go in?" AI Yao said, "How do you know there's nothing here?" Lei Xingfeng said, "If you don't believe me, you can go and dig for it yourself." This was a huge blow. It was not easy to enter this place. They had spent a lot of materials and energy, but they didn't get anything. This kind of situation was definitely heartbreaking. AI Yao believed him. He always felt that Lei Xingfeng's mining ability was many times better than his. Therefore, if he said there was nothing, there might really be nothing. AI Yao's face instantly turned green. The reason why he risked his life to come here was because there were countless resources here. Moreover, they were all needed by high-level cultivators. This kind of result was completely unacceptable to him. What was this? AI Yao was about to go crazy. He said, "There's nothing here, but it doesn't mean there won't be anything if we go in." Lei Xingfeng said, "That's the only way we can think of it." The gorge with the river was unexpectedly long. The two of them walked for almost a day before they turned into another gorge. There was no river here. That river gushed out from a dark hole at the bottom of the cliff. After making a big turn, they entered an extremely wide canyon. Then, Lei Xingfeng stood still. AI Yao walked a few steps and realized that Lei Xingfeng did not move. He turned around and asked, "What's wrong now?" Lei Xingfeng smiled bitterly. "I don't dare to walk anymore." AI Yao was puzzled. "Why? Is there another restriction in front?" "Don't joke. We just came out from a restriction. How can we be so close to another restriction?" Lei Xingfeng said, "That's right. It's a restriction." AI Yao almost broke down. He had almost exhausted all the materials and energy he had stored up to this point, especially energy. Even the energy he had stored up was almost depleted. He was just waiting to be replenished. In the end, not only was there no replenishment, he had to continue using it. He couldn't take it anymore. AI Yao's face was pale. He said, "Impossible. What restriction is this? Is it powerful?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I also feel that it's not normal. However, this restriction, it's a large-scale illusion formation and a spatial restriction. It's not a killing formation." AI Yao was shocked. "It's not a killing formation? That means there's no danger inside?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Old AI, you're a 6th ring true body expert. Do you have to be so childish? There's no harm in learning some restrictions." AI Yao's face was full of shame. He said, "What do you mean? Did I say something wrong?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I'd rather enter a killing formation than an illusion formation. Not to mention the even more troublesome spatial restriction. You have to know that once there's a spatial restriction, you can kill without spilling blood. Chapter 9:39. AI didn't know much about spatial restrictions and didn't know how powerful they were. However, Lei Xingfeng knew how dangerous spatial restrictions were. When he first obtained the 7th level Lei Yin, the cultivators who died were killed by spatial restrictions. That was a 7-ring true body, yet they couldn't escape. Therefore, the space restriction was the biggest threat to high-level cultivators. If one did not understand the space restriction, there was almost no hope of escaping. This thing was very perverse. Before Lei Xingfeng understood them, he didn't dare to provoke such restrictions. No one understood the power of spatial restrictions better than Lei Xingfeng. Once they trapped you, attacks alone were useless. Furthermore, spatial restrictions had a special characteristic. Any attack could cause you to miss. If you couldn't hit it, it was useless no matter how powerful it was. Lei Xingfeng said, "Maybe it's better to go in without knowing anything." AI Yao didn't understand at all. He said, "What do you mean? It's better if I go in like this?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I don't dare to go in like this. Maybe you dare because you don't understand. If you don't understand, you aren't afraid. If I understand, I'm afraid." AI Yao was confused. He said, "Tell me, can we go in or not?" This was a classic case of forgetting the pain after the scar healed. Actually, Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao both realized that the treasure might be in this restriction. Lei Xingfeng released his true body. This way, he could see further. AI Yao was shocked. He immediately released his true body and said, "Why did you release your true body? Is there a problem?" Lei Xingfeng looked at him speechlessly and said, "I just want to see clearly what the restriction is." AI Yao also knew that he was being oversensitive. He took a step back and said, okay, look." He looked carefully. Lei Xingfeng muttered, "Nonsense." AI Yao chuckled awkwardly. Lei Xingfeng calmed down and carefully observed the formation. The entire Grand Restriction formation completely enveloped the canyon. This was not an ordinary restriction array. It was much more complicated than the restriction array they had just passed through. After only looking at it for 10 minutes, Lei Xingfeng felt dizzy. It was too complicated. Closing his eyes and waiting for a moment, Lei Xingfeng checked again. Silver light flickered in his eyes. The entire canyon was filled with restriction nodes. Countless restriction nodes allowed Lei Xingfeng to deduce the structure of the restriction. When he was tired, he would rest for a while and then continue to observe. Time passed slowly. AI Yao knew that he had to rely on Lei Xingfeng here. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng didn't move. He didn't dare to disturb Lei Xingfeng. Instead, he retreated to the side and sat down. He didn't dare to withdraw his true body and just stood guard. The reason why Lei Xingfeng didn't dare to barge in recklessly was because he discovered that this restriction array was really too big. It filled the entire canyon and even extended outwards. As for where it extended outwards, he didn't know because he couldn't see the top of the restriction. This was a super huge illusion array. With the addition of spatial restriction, anyone who entered would feel as though they had entered another world. This was definitely not fun. Even though Lei Xingfeng could see through the restriction, he still had some misgivings about this formation. After observing for 7 days, Lei Xingfeng withdrew his true body and said, "Help me look after it." Saying this, he took out a bee-skin cushion and fell asleep. Even just looking at the Grand Restriction Array was enough to tire him to death. Just calculating for the past 7 days had almost cost him his life. Before AI Yao could say anything, he heard Lei Xingfeng's snoring. This fella almost fell asleep the moment he laid down. After sleeping for 2 days, Lei Xingfeng finally recovered. AI Yao saw Lei Xingfeng wake up and asked, "Can we go in?" Lei Xingfeng shook his head and said, "Give me a few days. Let me think it through before I make a decision." AI Yao said, "All right, I'll listen to you." He had to listen because he didn't understand anything. Lei Xingfeng took out some food and water to fill his stomach. After eating, he released his true body and turned into a statue again. He looked at the restriction array motionlessly. He roughly understood a part of the operation of the formation and also understood the changes in the spatial restriction. In addition, this formation didn't have any offensive restriction. This made Lei Xingfeng feel a little strange. Most importantly, the space restriction here was very ordinary. It wasn't a strangulation type of space restriction. After repeatedly deducing, Lei Xingfeng discovered that the spatial restriction here was more of a combination with an illusion array. Such a restriction array didn't feel particularly threatening to Lei Xingfeng. What was this? Lei Xingfeng couldn't understand. The restriction here didn't kill people. Why didn't it kill people? He didn't understand at all. In the end, Lei Xingfeng determined that this restriction array didn't make things difficult for people. It was more like a restriction array with a special meaning. As for what it meant, he had to go in and explore it himself. This time, AI Yao didn't ask. He patiently waited for Lei Xingfeng to explain. He believed that Lei Xingfeng would definitely tell him. Sure enough, Lei Xingfeng said, "Old AI, we have to go in this restriction array. What do you think?" AI Yao smiled bitterly and said, "You have to go in. What can I do?" Exine Feng spoke, "There's no way out of here, which means that if we go back, we'll have to go through the restriction again, or we'll have to go through this restriction. There's no other way." Even if he had the mirror world, he wouldn't tell her about it. AI Yao said, "All right, I'll go in with you. Right? Give me some energy crystals." Lei Xingfeng knew that this guy was completely broke. No matter what, he had to give him some energy crystals. Fortunately, he had a lot of energy crystals. It was enough for him to squander. After getting some energy crystals, AI Yao's heart calmed down a lot. He was no longer restless. These things were the guarantee of his strength. Without them, he wouldn't have the strength to fight or move forward. He didn't have a lot of energy crystals. It was far from enough for him to fight unscrupulously. Even so, he was very satisfied. Lei Xingfeng continued to observe. He couldn't completely control this restriction array. However, he needed to know the key changes of this restriction array, especially the spatial restriction changes. After a while, he said, "Maybe the way out is in this restriction array." AI Yao said, "What do you mean? Is there a teleportation array in this restriction array?" Lei Xingfeng said, "It's not a teleportation array. There are spatial restrictions in this restriction array. Some spatial restrictions, once triggered, will throw people out. Maybe they'll be thrown out of Nameless Peak. Maybe they'll be thrown to an unfamiliar place. For example, the first level of the peak." AI Yao was shocked. It can do that?" Lei Xingfeng smiled. "I think that's right. Otherwise, the appearance of this restriction would be too strange. This place is like a transfer point. It's really fun." With his understanding of this restriction array, he believed that even if he didn't get it right, it was more or less interesting. AI Yao thought about it and nodded. "That's good. I'm already a bit scared here. It's good to leave. Even if it's a bit of a loss, there's no danger to my life. If I go up, I won't be able to handle it." Even though he was a sixth ring master, he still didn't have much confidence in going up. Lei Xingfeng smiled. "Yeah, if there's a chance, I'll leave too. It's a bit out of my range of control. It's too dangerous." AI Yao agreed. "Yeah, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have been able to make it through the waterfall restriction array. I might have died in there." Lei Xingfeng smiled. "This restriction array doesn't seem too dangerous now. Of course, if you're unlucky, you might choke to death. I believe that you'll gain something after entering this formation." AI Yao said, "I hope so. Actually, I just want to leave this place. I can't imagine reaching this high and not gaining anything. Going up, damn it, I might as well go down." Lei Xingfeng said, "Let's go. I see a path." AI Yao said, "Is it the path through this restriction array?" Lei Xingfeng said, "No, it's just the first half of the path. I can't see the latter half. This restriction array is too big. The entire valley is probably a restriction array. I can't see the latter half at all." AI Yao said, "There's only half of the path." Lei Xingfeng said, "It's good if there's half of the path. You walk. Don't talk about half of the path. Take a few steps for me to see." AI Yao immediately deflated. He knew that if he walked alone, who knew what would happen. He said, Okay, I'll follow you. I'll follow you. I'm sick. I'll walk alone. Following Lei Xingfeng, the two walked into the restriction array. AI Yao felt like he was going to vomit after entering so many restriction arrays. It was really annoying. But no matter how annoying it was, AI Yao could only obediently follow Lei Xingfeng into the array. He was being led by someone who was proficient in restrictions. If he walked alone, he doubted whether he would dare to enter after being tortured by so many restrictions. Fortunately, with Lei Xingfeng around, AI Yao didn't have to worry about these things. He followed Lei Xingfeng into the restriction array. Suddenly, the surrounding environment and scenery changed. AI Yao knew that this was the effect of the illusion array, but he didn't know that there was a spatial restriction array here. In other words, this place might not be the same place. After Lei Xingfeng brought AI Yao into the array, he stopped after 3 steps. AI Yao asked, "How is it?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Amazing." AI Yao suddenly became nervous and said, "Amazing? Will be dangerous?" The originally fearless person was actually scared by Lei Xingfeng. This was the shadow of the restriction array. Lei Xingfeng took out the steel rod and gave one into AI Yao. He said, "Hold on tight. If you let go, I might not be able to find you." AI Yao said, "Okay." He couldn't just grab it with one hand. He used both hands to grab it tightly. He also understood that if he was teleported away by the array, he really wouldn't be able to find Lei Xingfeng. At that time, he would have to search by himself. It wouldn't be easy. Chapter 940. Only then did Lei Xingfeng continue to move forward. All around them was yellow soil. There were no rocks or plants. All they could see was golden soil that stretched as far as the eye could see. AI Yao's heart was beating like a drum because he couldn't see through the restrictions. He asked, "What is this place?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't care where this place is. We have to get there quickly." AI Yao thought, "Get there quickly? How we get there? I can't even see the end." However, he said, "All right, I'll follow you." Lei Xingfeng still didn't walk in a straight line. He would take a few steps forward, a few steps to the left, a dozen steps to the right, and then a few steps back. It was as though he was walking in a maze. AI Yao followed Lei Xingfeng and walked left and right. He was too embarrassed to ask why they were walking like this. He knew that if he did, he would be despised by Lei Xingfeng. After walking for about half a day, the surroundings suddenly changed. Another huge canyon appeared, and it was completely different from the one they saw before they entered the formation. Lei Xingfeng said, "All right, you can let go." AI Yao let go and asked, "Are we out?" Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but laugh. "Out? Don't even think about it. This is just a point. There are good things in this point." As soon as he entered, he saw a dazzling patch of light. There were many materials and ores. This place could be replenished. AI Yao was shocked. "There are materials here?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Of course. Dig it yourself. There are materials everywhere. Remember to share them with me according to the ratio." AI Yao agreed sullenly. He was in debt and didn't know why he owed Lei Xingfeng so much. He had no choice but to agree. He was relying on Lei Xingfeng. Lei Xingfeng said, "Look carefully. Don't go past the bottom of the canyon. Don't go past this huge rock. If you go past it, you will be moved by the restrictions." AI Yao was dumbfounded. "Great migration?" Lei Xingfeng giggled and said, "That's right. If you don't go well, it'll be a great migration. You might be thrown out of Nameless Peak or into some other canyon. There might be more resources to excavate, or there might be nothing." AI Yao hurriedly said, "I understand now. This great restriction is an opportunity to become rich and powerful. Am I right?" Lei Xingfeng smiled and nodded. "You're right this time. This is an opportunity. In this restriction, it's not about the danger, but about how many opportunities you can obtain. If you're unlucky, then you won't have any opportunities. Now, this is your first opportunity, and you can obtain many good things. Dig with all your might, old man. Remember to share everything you find with me." AI Yao had a bitter expression on his face. Actually, he was very happy in his heart. Dividing the things of others meant that he would be able to obtain them. Otherwise, what was the point of dividing? Of course, he had to complain. He said, "All right, a phone. Old brother, you see, it wasn't easy for me to come here. Don't share too much." Lei Xingfeng rolled his eyes at him and turned to mine. He had to find high-value ores first. This was what he wanted to do first. AI Yao and Lei Xingfeng were worlds apart in terms of mining. AI Yao could only dig randomly, while Lei Xingfeng looked at what he dug first. Of course, this didn't rule out the possibility that AI Yao was lucky and could find top-quality ores randomly. Even so, AI Yao didn't have any advantage. Most of the ores he excavated had to be given to Lei Xingfeng. Along the way, the more ores AI Yao dug up, the better the quality, and the more rare the ores were, the more heartache he felt. On the other hand, Lei Xingfeng was digging happily. He had used up a lot of materials and was in a state of shortage. After reaching the fourth ring body, he needed a huge amount of materials. Without a source, he wouldn't be able to increase his strength, let alone level up. The two dug very quickly, especially Lei Xingfeng. He dug very accurately and sent large amounts of ores directly into the mirror realm. This saved him a lot of space. Although the hidden Luin space could store large amounts of items, there was still a limit. Especially ores, these things could take up a lot of space. Normally, the ores cultivators obtained would be purified as long as they had time. Even the basic materials could save a lot of hidden Luin space. Lei Xingfeng didn't care. As long as he dug out something, he would send it into the mirror realm. The space there was truly huge. He collected more ores. Anyway, there were a lot of people in the mirror realm who could help him purify the materials. He only cared about digging. Lei Xingfeng dug at a point, while AI Yao dug out the ground and pushed forward. He didn't care if there was anything. He just pushed forward. As long as it was in his path, it would definitely be dug out. AI Yao actually wanted energy crystals more. He wasn't in a rush for materials, but there were all kinds of materials here. There wasn't even a single energy crystal. This made him very disappointed. After a day, the two of them stopped fighting. Xi and Feng stopped because all the good stuff had been dug out and there wasn't much meaning left. Mo Yao stopped because he realized that he couldn't dig anything out of the ground. He gave a portion of the ores to Lei Xingfeng. There wasn't much left. Luckily, Lei Xingfeng didn't care and kept it. If he didn't give it, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't really ask for it. AI Yao said, "What's the next step?" Lei Xingfeng said, "An interesting restriction formation. I kind of understand." This time, AI Yao didn't ask why. He just looked at Lei Xingfeng. Lei Xingfeng smiled. This restriction formation really depends on luck. If you're lucky, you could get a lot of good stuff. Old AI, let me tell you, this place is considered a relatively bad location. AI Yao looked surprised. He said, "What would be in a good location?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I don't know what it is, but it definitely won't be the ores we dug out now." AI Yao said, "What I lack the most now is energy crystals, especially high-grade and top-grade ones. It's best if we can get such treasures. Then I'll be relieved." Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't worry. There's definitely some here. Also, there's no need to worry. This restriction formation isn't a killing formation. It's a formation for finding treasures. It won't consume much energy." AI Yao said, "That's good. That's good. I don't have enough energy reserves. I feel a little uneasy." Lei Xingfeng understood AI Yao. If a high-grade cultivator didn't have enough energy, he would definitely feel uneasy. It was the same for him. After going through this path and this canyon, Lei Xingfeng had already figured out the rules of this formation. The next step was to test it. He said, "Let's go. Let's see if we can find the location of the energy crystals." AI Yao was instantly overjoyed. He said, "Good. That's great." Lei Xingfeng walked around the canyon. AI Yao also foolishly followed him. Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "So it's like this." AI Yao muttered in his heart, "Like what?" Lei Xingfeng took out the steel rod and passed one into AI Yao. He said, "Hold on tight. If you let go, it means we're separated. Understand?" AI Yao nodded. At this time, even if he was killed, he wouldn't let go. Lei Xingfeng said, "Hold on tight. Follow me." As he said that, he bumped into the canyon's cliff. AI Yao was shocked. Then, Lei Xingfeng disappeared into the canyon's cliff. Because of the steel rod, he was also dragged into the cliff. AI Yao's vision blurred. He found himself in an unfamiliar environment. The most interesting thing was that there were no plants under the trees. Every tree was as thick as a person's arm. The top of the tree was a bundle of branches and leaves. It was like a toothpick holding a ball of cotton. It was as strange as it could be. The distance between each tree was tens of meters or hundreds of meters. Some places were sparse, while others were dense. AI Yao instinctively thought that Lei Xingfeng would walk towards the empty forest. But after walking with Lei Xingfeng for a while, he understood that Lei Xingfeng wasn't what he imagined. First, he stood in the forest and didn't speak or move. He carefully observed the forest. His eyes flickered with a silver light. With his current strength, he didn't need to spit out the silver light in his eyes. Of course, if he wanted to see more clearly and understand, the silver light in his eyes would still be spat out. Obviously, this place didn't need it. After a while, Lei Xingfeng dragged AI Yao forward. After about 10 steps, Lei Xingfeng began to turn left. There was a huge tree in front of him. Lei Xingfeng didn't hesitate to bump into it. AI Yao followed Lei Xingfeng's rhythm. He watched as Lei Xingfeng disappeared into the tree and appeared on the other side. AI Yao also followed suit. AI Yao was shocked. This is an illusion. Lei Xingfeng laughed. If I didn't bring you in from this angle, try to see if you can pass through it. At that time, you will realize that this tree isn't an illusion. AI Yao didn't understand. Why? Lei Xingfeng said, this is a product of the combination of an illusion array and a spatial restriction. If you walk in the right direction, you can pass through. If you walk in the wrong direction, you will be sent away. It's that simple. AI Yao said, sent away? Oh, I understand. You will be sent away. Where will you be sent to? Lei Xingfeng said, if you don't walk like me, you will be thrown out of this illusion array. Who knows where you will end up? And this is a random teleportation. You might still be in the array, or you might be thrown out of Nameless Peak. AI Yao smiled bitterly. If Lei Xingfeng wasn't around, he would definitely be randomly thrown out of Nameless Peak. Lei Xingfeng said, don't worry. Just follow me. I'm getting more and more familiar with this restriction array. He was secretly pleased. If he didn't know about spatial restrictions, he would be completely at a loss. But now that he was proficient in spatial restrictions, he was like a fish in water. After many twists and turns, AI Yao felt dizzy. But they were still in the middle of the forest and weren't thrown out. This showed how impressive Lei Xingfeng was. Suddenly, Lei Xingfeng stopped and said, stand close to me. This time, we have to work together. Otherwise, we might be separated. All right, I'm going to keep my steel rod. Chapter 941. AI Yao approached Lei Xingfeng and let go of the steel rod in his hand. Lei Xingfeng put it away and said, we have to take 3 steps at the same time. We can't make a single mistake. AI Yao said, okay, I understand. The two of them had already formed a tacit understanding. When Lei Xingfeng shouted, let's go, the two of them took a step at the same time, and AI Yao followed suit. After taking 3 steps, the two of them instantly disappeared from their original spot. They were thrown out by the restriction here. Their eyes lit up as they arrived at another large canyon. This canyon wasn't particularly long. It was only about 1 kilometer in length and 300 meters in width. The ground was filled with huge stalagmites. Lei Xingfeng could tell at a glance that these were energy crystal stalagmites. However, the stalagmites here were even bigger. The bottom of the stalagmites were a few meters in diameter, and they were dozens of meters tall. They were scattered all over the canyon. AI Yao also recognized what they were. He was dumbfounded and said, good heavens, this is the first time I've seen so many top-grade energy crystals. The two of them began to divide the stalagmites. AI Yao realized that he could only get a small portion of the stalagmites in this canyon. Although he was very unwilling, he had to accept it. After all, Lei Xingfeng had brought him here. If Lei Xingfeng had let go, he wouldn't have been able to find anything if he had gone in alone, let alone these energy crystals. Therefore, AI Yao didn't argue or make trouble. He quickly collected the stalagmites with Lei Xingfeng. This was a great help to him. One had to know that his energy reserves had already reached the limit. If Lei Xingfeng hadn't supported him first, he wouldn't have been able to hold on. Lei Xingfeng didn't specifically count how many energy stalagmites he had obtained. The energy stalagmites in this canyon could definitely be used for 2 or even 3 advancements. They could also be used for many battles. According to the number of stalagmites, the energy crystals obtained this time definitely exceeded the reserves of several large energy mines. There is also no need to deliberately purify them. This was the best energy reserve and also the best energy for advancement. Lei Xingfeng had seen this kind of large-scale energy crystal many times. He had relied on his familiarity with restrictions to find it. This was the first time AI Yao had seen such a stalagmite's energy crystal. He had seen it before and knew how precious it was. However, he had never seen such a large number of them. Even if she only got a small portion, she was satisfied. Not only was she fully stocked, she also had a large amount of stalagmites in her seal and hidden lune space. After all the stalagmites in the canyon were cleared, Lei Xingfeng asked, "Is it enough? If it's not enough, we can find another place." "Follow me. Let's hold on to the steel rod. When it's time, we'll go in." He took out the steel rod and let AI Yao hold on to one end. Once again, she led him along the way. After walking for a while, Lei Xingfeng put away the steel rod and entered another point with AI Yao. From this point, they entered another canyon. The terrain here was mostly canyons. All sorts of canyons were actually formed by countless cracks on Nameless Peak. Looking at Nameless Peak from afar, one couldn't even see these huge canyons. One could only see the fine cracks on the rocks. Countless cracks formed countless canyons. The entire Nameless Peak was a huge maze formed by countless canyons. There were countless restrictions and all sorts of strange things inside. In this huge canyon, there were also countless materials. These were no longer ores, but ready-made materials. They seemed to grow out of the ground, forming all sorts of strange piles. Lei Xingfeng didn't even collect them. He directly released Lei Yin and let Yin choose what to collect. AI Yao also released her own seal. However, she was dismayed to find that even so, her 6-ring seal couldn't compare to Lei Xingfeng's 4-ringed Lei Yin. Large amounts of materials flew up and entered Lei Xingfeng and AI Yao's seals. Most of them entered Lei Yin. AI Yao didn't expect Lei Xingfeng's Lei Yin to have spatial fey. This was the biggest secret of Lei Xingfeng's Lei Yin. With little Kong, how could AI Yao's seal compare to Lei Xingfeng's seal? The difference between the two was too great. Because the canyon was very long, the two of them went in tandem. In the end, the two of them were side by side. In the end, AI Yao still couldn't snatch Lei Xingfeng's seal. The main materials, the good materials, all flew into Lei Xingfeng's Lei Yin. AI Yao said helplessly, "A phone. How did you cultivate your seal? Why is it so perverted?" Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, I have always been a humble person. Therefore, I can't stand looking at my seal. It seems incomparably domineering." AI Yao was speechless. These words were so infuriating. Lei Xingfeng drove Lei Yin to absorb the materials crazily. At first, it was only absorbing the useful materials. When Lei Xingfeng transmitted his thoughts to Little Kong, the materials accumulated on the ground couldn't be kept. AI Yao then saw all the materials flying into Lei Yin's body crazily. AI Yao's seal was pitifully absorbing some leftovers. This difference almost made AI Yao vomit blood. This was too much of a bully. Soon, 80% of the 3,000-meter-long canyon was collected by Lei Xingfeng's seal from the beginning to the end. AI Yao didn't even receive 10% of the leftovers. Lei Xingfeng didn't even care about the leftovers. He said, "Old AI, everything on the ground is yours." AI Yao wanted to cry. What kind of seal was this? It was so overbearing and shameless. It should at least leave behind some good stuff. In the end, it was only left with the worst materials. Of course, even the worst material was actually considered a good item. However, everything was afraid of comparison. Compared to the previous materials, what was left behind was just dregs. Even if it was dregs, AI Yao still obediently picked them up. In some places, even such dregs couldn't be picked up. The two cleared another canyon. Lei Xingfeng felt very good about Lei Yin's ability to automatically snatch materials. It turned out that Lei Yin could also use it like this. Unfortunately, Lei Yin couldn't directly snatch minerals. Those things weren't purified and were different from ready-made materials. AI Yao's heart felt like it was being trampled by 10,000 horses. However, he could only blame himself. He couldn't blame Lei Xingfeng. It was no wonder. He had 6 true ring bodies and 6 seals. However, he couldn't snatch materials from someone with 4 true ring bodies and only had 4 seals. AI Yao was ashamed of himself. The difference between cultivators was so huge. This made AI Yao speechless. Not to mention the previously agreed distribution plan, just the fact that a cultivator with 4 true ring bodies was able to snatch materials from him just by relying on a seal made AI Yao unable to be dissatisfied. When they reached the top of the canyon, AI Yao said, "Should we go back to the original formation?" Lei Xingfeng smiled. "That's right. Let's finish this round first before we consider the next step," he said in high spirits. He didn't expect to gain so much. Therefore, he didn't plan to give up on any of the deductions. According to his calculations, he had deduced many good points. Of course, there were also many points that he hadn't deduced. Lei Xingfeng also knew that with such a huge illusion formation and spatial formation, it was impossible for him to take care of everything. Even so, he had profited greatly. Chapter 942. Returning to the original restriction formation, they were still surrounded by trees. AI Yao said, "Interesting. Shall we continue?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Of course, unless you want to go out." AI Yao was shocked. No, this place is good. Hee, very good." Lei Xingfeng laughed. "Then let's continue. I believe that after this round, not only will we be able to gather enough resources to advance, we will also be able to reach a higher level." The two set off again. After going back and forth, they found a total of 7 points. Other than one that had nothing, the other 6 had great gains. Even if AI Yao only collected a small portion, it was still a huge profit. He had gathered enough materials and energy to advance. There was one thing that AI Yao was confused about. With his strength, his Luan Chang space was half full. He noticed that Lei Xingfeng had more things than him, but he didn't seem to care. How big was his Luan Chang space? He wanted to ask Lei Xingfeng a few times, but for some reason, AI Yao felt fear. He wanted to ask a few times, but he swallowed it back down. This made him a little depressed. Other than the materials that Lei Xingfeng collected by Lei Yin, Lei Yin only had some extreme and treasure-grade materials in his Luan Chang space. Everything else was thrown into the mirror world. Of course, as Little Kong grew, his ability to collect and store things also grew rapidly. Lei Yin's storage space was already much bigger than his Luan Chang space. According to Lei Xingfeng's estimation, after years of collecting, the resources he obtained would be enough for him to advance to 6th ring, or even 7th ring true body. However, Lei Xingfeng didn't know that. He only knew that he still needed to collect large amounts of materials and energy. This hobby of collecting was left over from his previous life. After obtaining the Luan Chang space and Lei Yin in this life, it became even more popular. Lei Xingfeng liked to collect all kinds of things, whether he needed them or not. It was a habit. Now, he liked to collect extreme-grade materials, extreme-grade energy, treasure-grade items, anything that was worth collecting. Lei Xingfeng found the direction to advance and brought AI Yao into another layer of restriction. This place was still an illusory array, surrounded by huge stone pillars. There were countless stone pillars, and the gaps between them were similar to that of a forest. Some were wide, some were narrow, some were real, and some were fake. Of course, in Xian Feng's eyes, this was immediately seen through. Mo Yao didn't dare to move either. She waited behind Lei Xingfeng and didn't dare to ask. She knew that Lei Xingfeng was plotting against the restrictions. As the time she spent with Lei Xingfeng increased, AI Yao gradually understood some of Lei Xingfeng's actions. She knew that there were times when she couldn't disturb him. This layer of restriction was even more complicated. Even Lei Xingfeng found it difficult to deduce. Therefore, he stood there for a long time, trying to deduce the possible resource areas of this restriction. According to Lei Xingfeng's estimation, there should be a lot of resource areas here. Even if he couldn't deduce all of them, he would be very satisfied if he could deduce a few. That was because the benefits of a resource site were like entering a mountain of treasures. It was to the extent that one's hands would go limp. This was the best opportunity. If he grasped this opportunity, Lei Xingfeng would be able to rapidly advance. When a cultivator reached the fourth true ring body, their cultivation relied on the accumulation of materials and energy. In other words, the development of seals was actually the development of restrictions. The development of restrictions relied on energy and materials. Without these materials and energy, it was like plants without soil and water. Everything was empty. The amount of resources Exine Feng had now far exceeded his needs. As long as he had enough time, he would definitely be able to level up. This was also the reason why practitioners wandered the world. It was all for the sake of resources. Lei Xingfeng knew that he had obtained a lot of resources recently, but he didn't have time to calculate if it was enough for him to advance. This was because he could still obtain a large amount of materials and energy. As long as he wasn't thrown out by the restriction, anything was possible. This was why he was so careful. AI Yao was impatient, but he understood that he had to wait for Exine Feng to finish observing. This was extremely important. Even if he was impatient, he had to wait. Just as he was about to explode, Exine Feng spoke. Lei Xingfeng said, "Old AI, our luck is pretty good. There's a very important spot here. There are 2 other spots, and they should be pretty good. Let's go to the small one first. The last one is also the most important one." What else could AI Yao say? He said, "I'll listen to you." Lei Xingfeng chuckled. He knew that AI Yao was completely convinced by him. This was the power of a restriction grandmaster. He had no choice but to be convinced. Exine Feng brought Moyin to the 2 points and returned after a round of looting. To reach the most crucial point, they had to walk a certain distance, and this distance was rather dangerous, not because of the danger of being attacked, but because of the danger of being thrown off. This path was filled with traps, and they had to be extremely careful in order to pass. AI Yao grabbed the steel rod with one hand. To be honest, he felt rather aggrieved. He felt as though he was blind and needed someone to hold his hand to walk. Furthermore, he couldn't walk the wrong way or else he would fall into a pit. Lei Xingfeng didn't dare to give up on AI Yao. At the crucial moment, the strength of his 6-ring true body could help him stall the enemy. Then, he would have time to think of ways to restrain the enemy. The 2 of them complemented each other. Neither of them dared to give up on the other. This was a very typical situation. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng did his best to lead AI Yao. Even if he took a portion of the resources, this was a price that had to be paid. Moreover, AI Yao had been forced by Lei Xingfeng. The distribution of resources was in an unfair position. Lei Xingfeng could get the lion's share. This made Lei Xingfeng very satisfied. In terms of resources, there were many cultivators who didn't have integrity. Fighting and killing were common. Lei Xingfeng could be said to have done an excellent job by agreeing beforehand and suppressing them with strength. The 2 of them reached the last spot with great difficulty. During this time, Lei Xingfeng even found a relatively safe place to rest. Otherwise, it would be difficult to continue. When they finally reached the spot, Lei Xingfeng's body was covered in sweat. Along the way, everything else was passable. The key was that they could constantly see traces of spatial restrictions. If they were careless and touched them, the consequences were clear. They would be eliminated immediately. It would be difficult to come back, even if he had the mirror realm. Lei Xingfeng put away the steel rod. AI Yao said, "How many steps? This time we have to stick together. It's not a matter of how many steps. We have to enter as a group. Once we spread out, we each take our own things." AI Yao broke out in cold sweat. These words were chilling. He said, Don't worry, I'll keep a close eye. If there are any accidents, I won't blame you. I understand. You've done your best. Lei Xingfeng didn't delay any longer. He stood up and said, "Get ready. When I say start, follow closely." This time, he was very serious. This was because Lei Xingfeng had speculated that this spot was very important. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many spatial restrictions and traps. Along the way, he was really sweating. It wasn't because he was tired, but because he was scared. If he missed it, he would miss it completely. The possibility of doing it again was very small, even if he had the mirror realm. It should be known that the mirror realm wasn't omnipotent. AI Yao said with a serious expression, "Yes." He also knew that Lei Xingfeng was really nervous. Along the way, even when they were in danger, Lei Xingfeng didn't behave like this. Lei Xingfeng started, and AI Yao followed closely. The two of them were almost at the same time as they walked forward. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. In an instant, the two of them disappeared and stepped on the same spot at the same time. The result was as Lei Xingfeng had predicted. AI Yao's cautiousness paid off. Actually, Lei Xingfeng wasn't confident that he could go over at the same time. The spatial restrictions at this spot were very complicated, and the mechanism was also very strange. The two of them appeared in a huge canyon at the same time. Xian Feng was shocked to find that there were no materials or energy here, only a flat rock floor and a flat cliff. The only difference was that there were many strange words and diagrams carved on the cliff. Xian Feng couldn't understand the words, but he could understand the diagrams. They were diagrams of restrictions. If Lei Xingfeng wasn't proficient in restrictions, he wouldn't have been able to recognize them. When AI Yao saw these words and diagrams, he was completely shocked. He said, "9 seals cultivation technique." Lei Xingfeng said, "What do you mean?" AI Yao said, "A cultivation technique to cultivate to the 9th ring sage body." Lei Xingfeng said, "There's such a thing. Do you recognize the words on it?" AI Yao said, "Of course, but I don't recognize the diagrams. The two have to be combined." Lei Xingfeng was instantly happy. He said, "Okay, I want the meaning of the words. Record on the Star Python record for me." The Star Python record had a special characteristic. If the person who recorded it understood what it meant, then a person who didn't understand words would be able to understand the meaning behind it. The diagrams were the same. AI Yao said, "Just the words are useless. If you don't understand the diagrams, you won't understand it." Lei Xingfeng said, "I understand the diagrams." AI Yao was overjoyed. He said, "Okay, let's work together to record it." He also understood the use of the Star Python record. There were words and diagrams on both sides of the cliff, so they had to record them slowly. Lei Xingfeng said, "You go first. I will cultivate here and wait." After obtaining so many materials and energy, Lei Xingfeng finally found a place and time to cultivate. AI Yao didn't have any objections. He said, "Okay, I will record the words. Oh, I will leave the diagrams blank. Then you can record them. This way, we can have the complete cultivation technique." Lei Xingfeng withdrew his true body. Lei Yin was still suspended. He started cultivating. The first thing he did was to erase the useless restrictions. This had become a habit. Recently, he hadn't had the time to deal with the newly formed restrictions in a lightning strike. Many of them were useless. Chapter 943. These restrictions were consuming Lei Xingfeng's materials and energy, so they had to be erased as soon as possible. Only then could the hidden dangers be removed, and the truly useful restrictions would be allowed to grow. The 4 Lei Yin had already fused together perfectly. This was also the result of Lei Xingfeng's meticulous design of restrictions. Other cultivators cultivated in a daze. Their cultivation allowed the restrictions in the seal to grow rapidly. As for whether the restrictions were useful or not, no one knew. After cultivating for so long, especially after seeing AI Yao's seal, Lei Xingfeng knew that his Lei Yin was much better. One was carefully cultivated, while the other was grown in the wild. The difference was so great that even Lei Xingfeng was shocked. Generally speaking, when one had 4 true ring bodies, the space in the 4 seals was still quite large. If one didn't control the growth of the restrictions, the entire seal would produce all sorts of restrictions. A large portion of them would be useless restrictions or restrictions with very little use. When one advanced to the 5th true ring, once the cultivation reached the later stages, the entire 5 seals would be filled with a mess of restrictions. When one reached the 6th seal, which was the 6th true ring body, the space in the first 5 seals would be mostly used up, and the space in the 6th seal would be quickly filled up. When one wanted to advance to the 7th true ring body, which was the 7th seal, the space in the 7th seal wouldn't be enough for the restrictions to be formed. This led to the failure of advancing to the 7th true ring body. This was why the 7th seal was said to be a huge hurdle. In fact, this wasn't a hurdle, but because the seals weren't properly planned. Ever since Lei Xingfeng saw AI Yao's seal, his understanding of seals had deepened. Knowing the layout and planning of seals was very important, so Lei Xingfeng definitely wouldn't allow the restrictions in his Lei Yin to grow carelessly. He also wouldn't allow useless restrictions to appear. In his current lightning strike, the restrictions that were preserved were all excellent restrictions. Each restriction group had its own function. Moreover, he had left enough space for new restriction groups to form. During this period of exploration and battle, another batch of restrictions had been formed in Lei Yin. Some were dealt with by Lei Xingfeng, while some were dealt with by Lei Xingfeng. Taking advantage of this cultivation opportunity, Lei Xingfeng quickly erased the useless restrictions. As the useless restrictions were removed, Lei Xingfeng started to drive the Lei Yin. The restrictions in the Lei Yin quickly grew. A large amount of materials were extracted into the restrictions. Lei Xingfeng watched the restrictions grow bit by bit. This process was definitely a unique enjoyment for Lei Xingfeng. Some special restrictions with a focus of Lei Xingfeng's maintenance and attention. Resources would be given to them. Many of these restrictions were formed from external inspiration. Many of them were extremely beneficial to the entire Lei Yin. But AI Yao didn't have it easy. He could recognize all the words on the cliff. However, to record them into the Star Python record, he had to understand the contents of the words before recording them. However, he didn't understand most of the contents. This was the so-called when you see a paragraph of words, you could recognize each word. However, you couldn't understand what they meant when they were connected together. This made AI Yao very painful. However, even if it was painful, he still had to record it into the Star Python record. This canyon was quite long, so AI Yao's recording speed wasn't fast. Lei Xingfeng spent 2 days to clean up the entire Lei Yin. At the same time, he was driving the Lei Yin, allowing the remaining restrictions to grow rapidly. Due to the large amount of materials and energy, the restrictions grew rapidly. This kind of cultivation was a long process. Lei Xingfeng wasn't in a hurry. He adjusted the restrictions bit by bit and understood the changes in the restrictions bit by bit. This allowed his knowledge of restrictions to increase greatly. The process of restriction growth was also the process of Lei Xingfeng's learning. Learning restrictions from Lei Yin was Lei Xingfeng's best discovery. This was also an important reason why his restriction proficiency grew so quickly. AI Yao might not be able to understand the words on the cliff, but the shock in his heart wasn't small. This was because the words on the cliff described the relationship between seals and restrictions. While recording, AI Yao pondered. He guessed that if it was Lei Xingfeng, he should be able to understand what these words were saying, especially the diagrams. With his shallow knowledge of restrictions, he should know that these diagrams were related to restrictions. However, he didn't understand them at all. They were too profound. With a large amount of resources and Lei Xingfeng's control of the Lei Yin and restrictions, the restrictions in the Lei Yin had developed greatly. This also meant that Lei Xingfeng had the possibility of overlaying the 5th Lei Yin seal. However, he wasn't certain. After all, the cultivation of 9 seals was still too unfamiliar. He had to rely on himself to figure it out. He had no choice but to be cautious. Xian Feng's current training wasn't for the sake of improving, nor was it for the sake of leveling up. This training was purely for the sake of stabilizing his current stage eliminating the unnecessary restrictions, tidying up the restrictions, and developing the ones that remained. These restriction communities were Lei Yin's foundation. They were the source of Lei Xingfeng's power and the foundation of his true body. As Lei Xingfeng's understanding of seals deepened, he felt that it was very broad and profound. He also developed a great interest in this strange thing called seals. Around 10 days later, AI Yao finally recorded the words on one side of the cliff. However, as he continued to read, he guessed the meaning of many of the words. He was really excited. The records on the cliff were definitely treasures. They were more precious than any materials or energy crystals. Lei Xingfeng didn't move at all. He kept staring at the restriction communities in the Lei Yin. During this period, the restriction communities were rapidly growing. It was to the extent that he had to slightly control the growth speed. Another 10 days passed. AI Yao recorded the words on the other side of the cliff into the Star Python record. He then sat down beside Lei Xingfeng. He was also tired to the point of dizziness. This kind of recording was the most exhausting. Lei Xingfeng already sensed AI Yao sitting in front of him. He opened his eyes and put away Lei Yin. He said, "Are you done recording?" AI Yao handed the Star Python record to Lei Xingfeng and said, "Although I can understand the words on the cliff, I don't understand the meaning of the words. Can you understand it?" Lei Xingfeng opened the Star Python record and started to read. This kind of reading was completely different from the reading in his previous life. It was a more advanced method. He could directly receive the thoughts of the recorder. Whatever the recorder wanted to know, he would know. It was very mystical. After reading for a moment, Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but say, "I'm the same. I don't understand." AI Yao immediately shook his head in disappointment and said, "I work for nothing." Lei Xingfeng said, "Right now, I really don't understand what it means. However, it doesn't mean that I won't be able to understand it forever. I need to combine it with the diagram. Then, I might be able to understand what it means." AI Yao was overjoyed and said, "Good. You go record it. I will cultivate while waiting for you." Lei Xingfeng stood up and said, "Okay, you cultivate. I will try to decipher the words and diagram recorded on the cliff." When he combined the diagram and looked at the recorded words, Lei Xingfeng immediately had an idea. This was the diagram of the restriction with the explanation of the words. However, the explanation was very strange and very difficult to understand. However, Lei Xingfeng compared it to the diagram and understood the restriction. He immediately understood the meaning of the words. At first, he was a little slow and confused. However, after comparing it with the diagram and his understanding of restrictions, Lei Xingfeng actually understood more than half of it. This was the description and understanding of the restrictions in the seal. What kind of small tricks could be used to detect the restrictions in the seal, how to find useful restrictions, and how to organize the world in the seal? Too mystical. Because Lei Xingfeng could already see the world in the seal, he had a very deep understanding of the words and diagrams. At the beginning, the words and diagrams taught how to cultivate seals and how to link seals. The level of detail made Lei Xingfeng very surprised. The more he looked, the more surprised he was. Because after understanding many things, Lei Xingfeng knew that they were all things that he had thought of and even done. Of course, there are many differences. What made Lei Xingfeng most proud was that he was not wrong. There were even some places that were much better than the records on the cliff. As he looked and thought, as he recorded, he could not help but smile. The records and diagrams at the beginning made Lei Xingfeng very excited. He was the happiest that he did not take the wrong path. Even the direction of cultivation was not only correct, but also very interesting. The records on the cliff started with the first true ring body. As Lei Xingfeng walked along the canyon, following the records and diagrams on the cliff, Lei Xingfeng quickly came to the fourth true ring body cultivation method. This was the most useful cultivation method for him. Compared to the restrictions in Lei Yin, the diagrams on the cliff showed that there were thousands of different restriction communities, of which Lei Xingfeng already had the most important restriction communities. What made Lei Xingfeng most surprised was that some of the restriction communities that he had were not recorded here. In other words, most of the restriction communities were recorded here. Only a small portion of the important restriction communities were not recorded here. This record was very helpful to Lei Xingfeng because there were a few more restriction communities. These restriction communities were ones that Lei Xingfeng had never seen before. One of the restriction communities was for the true body. It could greatly increase the defense and attack of the true body. It was a very interesting restriction community. It contained 7 types of restrictions that Lei Xingfeng had seen before and could understand. It was just that Lei Xingfeng had never thought of combining them like this. When Lei Xingfeng saw this combination, the restriction community had already sprouted in Lei Yin. Lei Xingfeng did a quick check and knew that there were no major problems. He did not even have time to record it. He directly activated Lei Yin and let the restriction community grow. Following this, the second restriction community appeared. This was also recorded on the cliff. Lei Xingfeng's advantage was that he was proficient in restrictions. Therefore, as long as he saw and understood it, his Lei Yin would be born. This was his greatest advantage. Chapter 944. It was also fortunate that he had obtained a large amount of materials earlier. This method of suddenly activating the lightning strike and creating a new restriction community required a large amount of materials as backing. Of course, he also needed to prepare sufficient energy crystals. And this was precisely Lei Xingfeng's strength. He looked at the diagram on the cliff and combined it with the words in the Star Python record to quickly form these restriction clusters. When the new restriction clusters grew, Lei Xingfeng could feel the difference. These restriction clusters could actually strengthen Lei Yin's restrictions. They were like catalysts that allowed Lei Xingfeng to grow rapidly. He recorded bit by bit, integrating the words and diagrams, and then re-recorded them in the Star Python record. He wasn't afraid of Moa Yao seeing it, because it was too difficult for Moa Yao to change it. He couldn't be like Lei Xingfeng, who could directly see the restrictions in the seal. Moreover, he didn't understand restrictions, so he couldn't differentiate which restrictions were useful and which weren't. Of course, if Moa Yao obtained this record, it would be very beneficial to his cultivation. It wouldn't be a problem for him to reach the 7th ring true body, but it would be almost impossible for him to reach the 8th ring. No matter how much materials and energy he accumulated, Moa Yao wouldn't be able to reach the 8th ring true body. This was because the potential of his seal had been exhausted. Moa Yao wouldn't know this. The restrictions that were useless in the beginning occupied too much space, and the useless restrictions blocked the useful restrictions. It was like planting a piece of land, but after planting the seeds, it was never tidied up. Instead, it was often fertilized and watered. The entire land was overgrown with weeds, and the true nutrients were taken away by the weeds. This was Moa Yao's seal. And even if Moa Yao could see the restrictions in the seal and was proficient in restrictions, she wouldn't be able to deal with them. The restrictions in the seal were all tangled together. How could she differentiate which restrictions were good and which ones were bad? Lei Xingfeng sighed. If one didn't understand restrictions and cultivated to the high level, they would be at a disadvantage. He also understood a principle. That was to say, those who didn't understand restrictions would at most be able to cultivate to the 6th ring, and it would be very difficult to reach the 7th ring. However, if he obtained the Star Python record, there might be hope for him to cultivate to the 7th ring. Similarly, those who could cultivate to the 8th ring sage body must be proficient in restrictions and be able to influence the restrictions in the seal to reach the 8th ring sage body. As for the 9th ring true body, which was the so-called 9-ring unification, Lei Xingfeng still didn't understand. Moby Demon also sat down and cultivated. Actually, Lei Xingfeng had advised him, but Moby Demon didn't listen. Lei Xingfeng had advised him not to repair it for the time being. There was very little space left in his seal. Once he advanced to 7 ring, new restrictions would grow and there would be no more space to move around. Of course, Moby Demon wasn't Wu Yang or Thunderstorm. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng just reminded him and didn't say anything else. This was a personal choice. Lei Xingfeng didn't need to offend Moby Demon over this. It wasn't worth arguing with Moby Demon over this. Whether it was good or bad would depend on Moby Demon's own judgment. He recorded and studied along the way. Lei Xingfeng spent much more time than Moby Demon. He spent dozens of days to record once. Especially towards the end, there were many restriction diagrams that he couldn't understand. Of course, as his strength increased and he overlapped with Lei Yin, he would eventually be able to understand them. Lei Xingfeng firmly believed this. The harvest from this canyon made Lei Xingfeng very happy. This harvest was more important than anything else. As long as he studied seriously, Lei Xingfeng would have a clear cultivation path. After recording everything, Lei Xingfeng sat at the bottom of the cliff and began to reflect on the content. The final 9 seals weren't actually 9 seals. According to the cliff's records, the final 8 seals would merge to form the 9th seal. The first 8 seals would merge to form the 9th seal, which was the final step. The 8 seals would merge into 1 seal. This was the so-called 9 seals merge into 1. According to the records, once one reached this level, their strength would reach an unimaginable level. As for the effects, it depended on whether one could reach this level. Words couldn't describe it. This made Lei Xingfeng very curious about the 9 seals merge into 1. Perhaps others would find it difficult to reach this level, but he knew that he had the qualifications and ability to merge the 9 seals into 1. He didn't know how many 8th ring true body experts there were in this world. He hadn't even seen an 8th ring true body cultivator, so he didn't know how powerful an 8th ring true body cultivator was. After making a copy of the Star Python record, Lei Xingfeng came in front of AI Yao. AI Yao immediately stopped cultivating and put away his seals. He stood up and said, "How is it?" Lei Xingfeng didn't say anything. He directly passed the Star Python record to him and said, "Look at it yourself." Due to Xian Feng's understanding of the Star Python record, AI Yao immediately understood. Only his understanding of restrictions was too shallow, so he only understood a lot of the content. But even so, he understood a lot of things. As AI Yao read the contents of the Star Python record, his face gradually became gloomy. He knew that he had taken the wrong path. This step was already his limit. When he saw the advancement from 6th ring to 7th ring, he stopped and closed his eyes to think for a long time. Lei Xingfeng didn't say anything. He just waited quietly. AI Yao's face was pale. His hands were trembling. One had to know that when a cultivator took the wrong path, there was still room to change at the beginning. However, at the peak, at AI Yao's level, it was almost impossible to change. Unless AI Yao had Lei Xingfeng's knowledge and methods, he might be able to make up for it. Even so, it would consume a huge amount of materials and energy. This meant that most of the restriction communities would be abandoned. Moreover, AI Yao didn't have Lei Xingfeng's methods and knowledge. It was impossible for him to cultivate again. AI Yao sighed and said, "I might as well not look at it. If I don't look at it, I still have the confidence to continue forward. Even if it's wrong, I don't care. But I know the right path, but I can't move forward. This is too unbearable." Lei Xingfeng said, "It's not to the point of despair. It's still possible to change it, but it's impossible to cultivate again. According to your seal, although it will be very difficult to advance to the 7th ring, it's not impossible." AI Yao became spirited and said, "There's still hope." He was completely stunned by the Star Python record. He didn't have any thoughts. He knew that he took the wrong path and was in despair. Lei Xingfeng said, "Of course there's hope. You're a 6th ring true body. Your strength isn't bad, and your seals aren't bad either. It's just that you didn't plan well from the start. And there's still hope to reach 7th ring." AI Yao smiled and said, "8th ring, I've never thought of it. I'll be satisfied if I can reach 7th ring." Actually, he also dreamed of reaching 8th ring and even merging 9 seals into 1. However, it was more of a dream. He never really thought of succeeding. If he could reach 7th ring true body, this would be a true bottleneck. His strength after breaking through would be incomparable to a 6th ring true body. However, this kind of breakthrough was very difficult. AI Yao asked honestly, "Afo, what should I do?" Lei Xingfeng said, I'm just giving a suggestion. It's up to you to listen. AI Yao immediately nodded and bowed. Yes, I'll definitely listen. Lei Xingfeng muttered, it's hard to say. AI Yao's ears perked up. What a phone, what did you say? Lei Xingfeng said, Old AI, you can stop your cultivation for now. Actually, you're already strong enough. You don't need to cultivate deliberately. Once you cultivate, it'll be time to advance. AI Yao was stunned. He said, Don't need to cultivate? Lei Xingfeng nodded. Yes, you don't need to cultivate. If you continue, you won't be able to advance at all. AI Yao was shocked. Are you serious? Lei Xingfeng shook his head. You don't know how to read the star python record. The records on the cliff are very clear. Actually, I've already understood and told you. You just didn't listen. AI Yao thought back and immediately remembered Lei Xingfeng's reminder. He said, I didn't care. Lei Xingfeng said, I don't care if you care or not. I just know that if you continue to cultivate at your current speed, you won't be able to advance at all. AI Yao said, why? Lei Xingfeng said, I can't explain. Even if I did, you wouldn't understand. You just need to know that with your current seal, there's still a chance of advancing. If you continue to cultivate, this hope of advancing will be completely destroyed. These words were a little infuriating, but AI Yao knew that Lei Xingfeng was speaking the truth. During this journey, he knew that Lei Xingfeng was a genius. Other than his strength being slightly weaker, he was much stronger than him. AI Yao said, All right, I'll listen to you and stop cultivating. But when can I advance? Lei Xingfeng said, once the materials, energy, and all the resources for advancement are prepared, you can advance. However, I have to remind you that you must be fully prepared. You only have one chance. If you don't grasp this chance well, then don't think about advancing again. Lei Xingfeng wasn't spouting nonsense. Once he began to advance, the space in his 6 seals would be extremely limited. With the addition of a new seal, the space would be barely enough. Once he began to advance, a large number of seal clusters would appear in his seal. AI Yao didn't know how to remove the useless seals. If he continued to grow crazily, once he didn't have enough resources, there would be no space for him to advance again. At that time, it would be extremely difficult for new seal clusters to appear. Of course, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't tell this to AI Yao. It was useless. Therefore, he just said that he would succeed on his first try. If he didn't succeed, then he would lose all hope of advancing. AI Yao didn't know why, but he made up his mind to follow Lei Xingfeng's instructions. He said, All right, I understand. Then what I lack now is materials and energy, especially energy. I've already prepared the materials and recently replenished them. I don't know if it's enough. Chapter 945. Lei Xingfeng said, You have to be sure. You have to be sure that you won't run out of resources midway. Once that happens, your dream of advancing will be completely over. AI Yao's heart trembled. Advancing to the 7th ring true body was his ultimate dream. His entire life was spent on cultivation. Other than cultivation, he was also searching for resources. In fact, he also knew how lucky it was to be able to cultivate to the 6th ring true body. Those who started cultivating at the same time as him had all died. Not to mention the 6th ring true body. Only 1 or 2 managed to reach the 2nd ring true body. In the end, they all died on the way. Therefore, this was a chance to advance. AI Yao wouldn't let it go. He said, I'll be very careful. I'll definitely prepare thoroughly before advancing. Lei Xingfeng said lightly, There's a time limit. AI Yao said, What do you mean? Lei Xingfeng said, After 2 years, you won't need to advance. This chance is effective for 2 years. After that, it'll be ineffective. Of course, if you can't resist cultivating, the time limit will be even shorter. According to your current situation, the earlier you advance, the better. Even if you didn't cultivate, the seal in the seal would slowly grow. Of course, the speed would be slower. In other words, if AI Yao didn't advance, his space in the seal wouldn't be enough to advance in 2 years. AI Yao nodded. I understand. I'm going to end this expedition early. When we return to the seal formation, You can give me some pointers and think of a way to get the seal to throw me out. Lei Xingfeng praised inwardly. This guy was very decisive. Once he knew the situation, he didn't hesitate to make a decision. Even if there were more things here, he wouldn't hesitate to give them up. Lei Xingfeng said, if you have enough materials, the energy, forget it. I'll give you some energy. The best place for you to advance is here. It's very suitable for cultivation. You should feel it yourself. There was no lack of materials for the Mogwai. He had been collecting them for so many years in preparation for his advancement. The only thing that was lacking was the energy. Originally, there was enough for his advancement, but after going through continuous battles, he had to use his true body to even walk. The energy consumption was simply too great. The stalagmite crystals he had obtained last time were enough for him to level up, but as a precaution, he had to prepare more. According to Lei Xingfeng, if he did not have enough energy, he would not have a second chance. AI Yao said happily, "You're giving me energy crystals?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Give it to you? No, I'll lend it to you. After you advance, you can slowly return it." AI Yao was overjoyed. He said, "Thank you, thank you." Lei Xingfeng had given him a batch of energy crystals. Most of them were premium-grade energy crystals. Of course, it wasn't as if he wouldn't give them top-grade stalagmites. However, Lei Xingfeng could not stay any longer. He had no intention of advancing here. He said, after you finish advancing, you can go and try your luck. If you're lucky, there will be benefits beyond your imagination. AI Yao said, "All right, I'll advance here. After I'm done, I'll try my luck. Maybe I'll really find something good." The two of them accompanied each other all the way and established a friendship. In the end, they parted ways. They both knew that they did not know when they would meet again. In this world, there were very few true friendships. This was because meeting again was an extremely difficult thing. Whether it was enmity or kindness, once they parted ways, there was almost no chance for them to meet again. Therefore, everyone understood. For example, Lei Xingfeng had given AI Yao a lot of energy crystals. Although he said that he was lending them to him, the two of them knew that the so-called lending was actually giving them away. AI Yao watched as Lei Xingfeng left. He immediately sat down cross-legged and began to think about how to advance. This was very important to him. Lei Xingfeng walked all the way to the bottom of the canyon. This was the place to return to the Forbidden Formation. Lei Xingfeng was a little nervous about going back alone. However, he was already very familiar with this formation. Therefore, there was little danger. He was very clear about the mysteries within. After stepping into the Forbidden Formation, Lei Xingfeng instantly returned to the Forbidden Formation. He was still using his true body to walk in the Forbidden Formation. In fact, it was not a big problem for him to walk in his true body. However, in this unfamiliar place, he did not dare to be careless. However, leaving AI Yao behind and Lei Xingfeng moving alone had great benefits. First, it was faster. Second, if he found any materials or energy crystals, it would be his harvest. Third, he could return to the mirror realm at any time. Of course, with the best cannon fodder gone, Lei Xingfeng had to be even more careful. There were many things in this place that he might not understand. Moreover, his strength level was on the low side. However, this illusory formation and spatial restriction formation was not a killing formation. It was more like a lucky draw formation. It was like gambling. If you made the right choice, you would be rewarded. If you made the wrong choice, you would be kicked out. It was not a matter of life and death. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng decided to get more things here. After entering the Forbidden Formation again, Lei Xingfeng was like a fish in water. Even if he did not completely understand this formation, it could not stop him. He had a plan of where to go and how far to go. He went all the way down and entered the next layer of the Forbidden Formation. There were more points in this circle. Lei Xingfeng entered according to the distance. Then, he began to enter. He searched point by point and plundered point by point. The things here were all top grade. There was no lack of lightning materials. The key was that the materials here were quite complete. As he moved forward and plundered, Lei Xingfeng obtained more and more things. Among them, There were two large canyons full of huge stalagmites. In fact, after Lei Xingfeng learned the technique carved on the cliff, he already had thoughts of advancing. He even found a way to continuously connect with Lei Yin. In other words, he could reach the sixth ring true body in one advancement. The only limitation was that he needed a huge amount of resources. Without a huge amount of resources, once the six Lei Yin were successfully connected, the restriction community would develop greatly. If the resources could not keep up, the integration of the entire Lei Yin would fail. Therefore, for him, it was not a matter of cultivation or restriction, but a matter of resources. There were many canyons hidden in this forbidden formation. There were large amounts of resources. Without the Moina, Lei Xingfeng's harvest was even greater. He could move faster. Just the materials and energy stored in the Lei Yin were enough for Lei Xingfeng to advance to the sixth ring true body. As more forbidden space points were discovered, Lei Xingfeng obtained more resources. He even had to put many materials and energy crystals directly into the mirror realm. In the mirror realm, Wu Yang and the others were all busy organizing. A large amount of materials poured in, making them very busy. Many of the materials were rare and could not be found outside. Apart from the materials that were enough for Lei Xingfeng, these materials were divided among the upper echelons of the secret sect. They also needed a large amount of materials to advance. Lei Xingfeng passed through the spatial restriction again and arrived at a canyon. There were also large amounts of words and diagrams recorded on the cliff of this canyon. Soon, Lei Xingfeng discovered that the content of the records on the cliff was similar to the words and diagrams recorded last time. There were only slight differences. It also described the 9-seal fusion cultivation technique. Lei Xingfeng skimmed through it carefully from beginning to end. He discovered that there were many details that were not recorded last time. He added them bit by bit. When he finished reading the words and diagrams recorded on the Star Python record, he suddenly discovered that the addition of these details made the 9-seal fusion cultivation technique complete. After muttering to himself for a long time, Lei Xingfeng discovered that there seemed to be more details to this cultivation technique. This meant that there might be more records on the cliff. Immediately, Lei Xingfeng attached great importance to this cliff record. After returning to the Great Restriction Array, Lei Xingfeng began to pay attention. This was because there were differences between entering the Resource Canyon and entering the Restriction Node that recorded the words and diagrams on the cliff. Soon, he discovered that there were 3 points that could be used to enter the stone carvings on the cliff. After testing them one by one, he discovered that 2 of the points were correct, while the other one was not. These 2 canyons were also records of the 9-seal fusion cultivation technique. Similarly, there were many differences in the details. Lei Xingfeng recorded these changes in the Star Python record. After a few rounds of comparison and practice, many ambiguous restrictions had been compared. Xi Feng realized that if he didn't have these details to compare, many of the restrictions would be problematic. This meant that the 9-seal fusion cultivation technique was not complete if he only looked at the records in one of the canyons. There were many pitfalls in the middle. The worst thing was that according to cultivation, the earlier stages did not matter. There would be no problem even if he cultivated to the 7th true ring body. However, once he reached the 8th true ring body, which was the 8th seal, problems would begin to appear. This would completely affect the fusion of the 8 seals. This meant that there would be a huge problem at the last step. After Lei Xingfeng figured out this problem, he could not help but break out in cold sweat. This was because he had already started to adjust Lei Yin's restrictions. At this moment, he had no choice but to stop and think about whether there were any problems with the restrictions that he had adjusted previously. Luckily, Xi Feng had obtained the 9 seals merge into one technique, but he hadn't had the time to practice it, so he didn't change much of the restrictions. After some careful organization, he realized that there wasn't much of a problem, allowing Xi Feng to let out a sigh of relief. This made Lei Xingfeng not dare to continue cultivating. He wanted to know how many such canyons there were with words and diagrams. After returning to the Great Restriction Array, Lei Xingfeng carefully avoided triggering the restriction nodes that could throw people out. He searched for the entrance points. After walking around, he did not find the same canyons. Instead, he found another canyon with piles of materials. Chapter 946. Slowly, Lei Xingfeng entered the inner layer of the formation. This formation was different from the outer layer. Apart from the outer layer, it also had offensive formations. However, there weren't many offensive formations inside. With Lei Xingfeng's eyesight, he could easily avoid them. However, he quickly discovered that these offensive formations were powerful enough to instantly kill him. This made him take them seriously. After carefully observing a few offensive formations, Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but feel a toothache. This formation was too abnormal. It used spatial formations as a foundation to force people into a corner of space. Then, the offensive formations would activate, making it impossible for them to dodge or evade. They could only face it head-on. If one's strength was extremely powerful, then they might be able to resist for a while. If one's strength was weak, then they would die in a few moves. Lei Xingfeng pondered for a moment. Then, he directly recalled his true body. This was because he understood that without Moa Yao as a meat shield, he would have to display his strength. By relying on Lei Yin's spatial formations, he would be able to ignore this formation. As his cultivation increased, Lei Yin's formations also developed. Lei Xingfeng knew that his spatial formations had also become more powerful. When walking in the formation, even if he touched a formation node, he would be able to directly move away. The formation nodes wouldn't be able to detect him. After recalling his true body, Lei Xingfeng felt like a fish in water. By relying on Little Kong's spatial formations, it was as if he had lost his body. Any formation node that bumped into his body would instantly pass through. The formation nodes were actually the eyes of the formation. Once the eyes were blinded, then the formation wouldn't be able to activate. This way, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't be in any danger. Of course, if Lei Xingfeng wanted to touch the formation, as long as he didn't use spatial techniques, then the formation would explode. Continuously entering the canyon, Lei Xingfeng kept looking for records of the next canyon. Along the way, Lei Xingfeng found 7 canyons. 2 of them were empty, 3 of them were filled with various materials, and 2 of them were filled with stalagmites. Although the harvest was great, Lei Xingfeng was not satisfied. What he wanted were the carvings and diagrams on the cliff wall, which would be the greatest help to him. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng didn't want to leave the restriction formation for the time being. He searched through 7 canyons in a row. He wanted to return to the mirror world, but he couldn't leave through the restriction formation. Therefore, he decided to find another canyon and return to the mirror world to rest. Finally, a day later, he found another teleportation point and entered a large canyon. He didn't even look carefully before returning to the mirror world. However, as he was leaving, Lei Xingfeng felt that this was not a canyon filled with materials or energy stalagmites. As for whether there were any words or diagrams on the cliff, he had not seen them yet. Coming out of his courtyard, Lei Xingfeng walked into the wooden shed and said, "I'm so tired. Hurry up and tell Fatty Jean to get some food." There was no one in the wooden shed except for 2 servants on duty. They were low-level disciples. When they saw Lei Xingfeng, one of them ran to the back of the courtyard. Jean Depeng was always in the kitchen area at the back. The other servant ran outside. Lei Xingfeng's return was a big deal. Now, the entire hidden sect relied on Lei Xingfeng to collect high-grade materials. Although the others had joined some local sects, the materials they obtained were far inferior. Therefore, every time Lei Xingfeng returned to the mirror world, the higher-ups of the hidden sect would come to meet him. Sitting in the wooden shed, Lei Xingfeng began to copy the Star Python record. The words and diagrams on the cliff wall were the 9 seals combined into one. He believed that as long as the higher-ups of the hidden sect obtained this cultivation technique, they would be able to completely clear the obstacles in their path. He copied a total of 3 copies of the Star Python record, which was enough. If the people of the hidden sect needed more, they could copy it themselves. Soon, Wu Yang and the others arrived at the courtyard. Gucci smiled and said, "A phone. Did you bring something good back this time?" Lei Xingfeng stood up to welcome them. He smiled and said, Master, why would you say that? But I really did bring something good. The group walked into the wooden shed and sat down. Wu Yong said, What is it? A phone. Hurry up and take it out for us to see. Hee hee. Lei Bao said, You ancestor, you really don't respect your elders. How can you ask a junior for things like that? Wu Yong said, The entire hidden sect depends on a phone. He's the only one who can go to dangerous places and reap better rewards than the others. They're all treasures we've never seen before. Gucci said, Don't talk about those useless things. What is a phone? Wu Yong raised his hand and slapped Gucci. He said, Great, you're looking down on your master just because you have a good disciple? What do you mean by useless things? Gucci suddenly realized that he was too anxious and offended his master. He said with a bitter face, Master, I wasn't talking about you. I wouldn't dare. Wu Yong said, I guess you wouldn't dare either. Humph. Gucci's bitter face made everyone laugh. Lei Xingfeng said, All right, stop fooling around. He took out the Star Python record and said, This is a real treasure. The higher-ups of the hidden sect will rely on this thing in the future. Wu Yong, Gucci, Thunderstorm, and the others' eyes lit up. Wu Yong said, A phone, what is this? A cultivation technique? Lei Xingfeng nodded. That's right, a 9-seal fusion technique. Everyone was shocked. Wu Yong showed a trace of disappointment. He said, 9-seal fusion is a 9-ring true body cultivation technique. We don't even have 2 seals. 9-seal fusion. That's too far away. Lei Xingfeng said with a smile, It's not what you think. This starts from the most basic 2-ring true body. It goes from 2 seals to 8 seals, and then 9 seals into 1. Ancestor, if you don't want it, I'll give it to Master. Wu Yong immediately became anxious. He said, Kid, you're bullying your ancestor. Lei Xingfeng shrunk his neck and said, I wouldn't dare. Really, it's our ancestor who thought wrongly. He said as he handed a Star Python record to Wu Yong. Then, he handed a Star Python record to Thunderstorm. Finally, he handed the Star Python record to his master, Gucci. The 3 read carefully, and their faces were full of shock. At this time, Jean Depang came out with a group of people. He put the food on the table and said with a smile, A phone, eat something first. Lei Xingfeng said, Fatties are the best. Then he began to eat. Jean Depang was obviously old. His hair was white, but he was still fat. He sat beside Lei Xingfeng and panted. Lei Xingfeng said, Fatty, if you don't cultivate, you won't be able to. Jean Depang said, I know, but I like it this way. Moreover, I know that even if I cultivate, I won't get anything. My interest isn't in cultivation. Lei Xingfeng shook his head. Jean Depang was the only cultivator who was only willing to eat and not cultivate. Wu Yong had finished reading the Star Python record. He closed his eyes and pondered. Soon, Gucci and Thunderstorm also finished reading. The 2 also closed their eyes and pondered. The 3 of them smiled. In fact, the 3 of them were ecstatic. They saw their goal and the possibility of reaching the second true ring body. Wu Yong said, I can understand the first part, but I don't understand the latter part at all. And I have a few questions, Lei Xingfeng said. And if you have any questions, I will answer them. Wu Yong asked a few questions. Lei Xingfeng thought it was very simple. He tried his best to answer in simple and clear words. Then it was Gucci's turn. Finally, it was Thunderstorm's turn. Lei Xingfeng answered them one by one. After Wu Yong understood, he continued to ask questions, and Lei Xingfeng continued to answer. These questions were the key to reaching the double seal realm. With the answers, the 3 of them began to understand the key points and points of advancement. This gave them a certain degree of confidence. Actually, Wu Yong, Gucci, Lei Bao, and Gao Yi had already reached the level of double seal, which was the level of having 2 true ring bodies. It was just that they had many questions about how to advance, and it was obvious that they couldn't rely on themselves to figure it out. With this cultivation method, it was equivalent to directly pointing out the path for them. As long as they understood the contents, advancing wouldn't be a difficult matter. Of course, there were other conditions for advancement, such as resources and energy. Now, this problem was more or less solved. Lei Xingfeng had gathered a lot of resources. There were also many disciples outside, constantly collecting all kinds of resources and energy. Therefore, with the materials and energy problem solved, there was nothing to stop the higher-ups of the hidden sect from advancing. They would definitely be the first batch to reach the second true ring body. Under their leadership, Lei Xingfeng's senior brothers and sisters wouldn't have a hard time advancing to the second true ring body. This was equivalent to opening up a path for the entire hidden sect. They could follow this path and become true high-level cultivators. No matter how you looked at it, this was extremely significant. Lei Xingfeng ate while answering questions. Slowly, the three of them were satisfied. As for the cultivation technique, they couldn't understand the latter half. They weren't in a hurry. They would cultivate to the second true ring body first and slowly explore it in the future. If Lei Xingfeng was here, he would explain these difficult questions. Lei Xingfeng said, "In our hidden sect, no matter who it is, as long as they reach a certain level and can cultivate the double seal realm, we'll make a copy of the Star Python record for them. At the same time, we'll provide them with the materials and energy needed to advance." Only when the strength of the people in the hidden sect increased would the entire hidden sect improve. Lei Xingfeng was very clear about this. The other higher-ups were also very clear about this. With Lei Xingfeng in the hidden sect, the entire hidden sect would develop greatly. Lei Xingfeng asked, "Yi, why hasn't little sister returned yet?" Thunderstorm said, "She should be back. I saw her the day before yesterday." Lei Xingfeng said, "Get someone to invite her over." Thunderstorm instructed a disciple to call her over. He smiled and said, "Yao Yao is doing very well now. She already has 3 true ring bodies." Lei Xingfeng was shocked and said, "Ah, that's amazing." Chapter 947. Wu Yang smiled. "Little girl, you're the second strongest in the hidden sect. You're amazing." Lei Xingfeng suddenly realized that Xian Yao had Xiaoling, especially the intelligent Xiaoling. As long as she had enough materials and energy, it would be easy for her to advance. Soon, Xian Yao flew down and ran excitedly to Lei Xingfeng's side. "Brother, I already have 3 true ring bodies." Hee, brother, you have to work hard, or I'll catch up." Her boastful tone made everyone smile. Lei Xingfeng smiled. "It's good that you caught up, hee. However, I have 4 true ring bodies now, and I'm about to advance." Everyone was speechless. The speed at which this pair of brother and sister increased their strength made them feel helpless. Lei Xingfeng smiled and patted her head. "This is a cultivation technique. Take it back and read it. It should be of great help to your cultivation." Xian Yao took the Star Python record and read it carefully. After a while, she raised her head in surprise. "This is a cultivation technique?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Yes, it's a technique that combines 9 seals into one." Xian Yao was overjoyed. "That's great. I was lacking this. Xiaoling doesn't know what to do now that I've reached this step." This is great." Lei Xingfeng said, "I've collected a lot of materials in the warehouse. You could go find them yourself. They're all high-grade materials, so there should be a lot of them suitable for you." Xian Yao said, "The materials are okay, but I don't have enough energy crystals." Lei Xingfeng said, Yes, there's a lot in the warehouse. You could take as much as you need." Many people around them showed envious expressions. Other than the higher-ups of the hidden sect, the materials and energy crystals were open to them. As long as they had them, they could take them without any restrictions. Only the middle and low-level disciples needed the approval of the higher-ups. Therefore, Xian Yao could get Lei Xingfeng's support without any restrictions. Especially at this stage, what limited the advancement of one's cultivation was no longer one's aptitude and potential. Instead, it was one's cultivation method and large amounts of resources. As long as there were resources, leveling up wasn't a problem. Lei Xian Yao's wood seal was managed by Xiaoling, especially since Xiaoling was of the wood attribute, so her wood seal was much stronger than most practitioners. Lei Xian Yao was a cultivation maniac. She couldn't let go of the Star Python record. She said, "I'll go back first. If I don't finish reading it and understand it, I won't be at ease. Exine Feng looked at her helplessly and said dotingly, Go, go. When you get your fourth true ring body, I'll bring you to a good place. Exine Yao giggled and agreed. She leaped into the air and instantly disappeared. Lei Bao shook his head and said, Yao Yao's training Feng. She is even more hard-working than you. Wu Yang said, Feng, you can't slack off. Otherwise, your little sister will catch up to you, haha. Gucci nodded and said, Yes, yes, you have to work hard. Lei Xingfeng was stunned for a moment. Then Wu Yang and the others laughed. Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, If my little sister catches up to me, it's not bad. Hee, actually, I can't wait for my little sister to be stronger than me. Everyone was speechless. Not only did he not care, he even looked happy. Thunderstorm knew that Lei Xingfeng couldn't wait to pamper his little sister. In this world, Lei Xingfeng was probably the one who pampered Lei Exine Yao the most. When Lei Exine Yao was young, Lei Xingfeng brought her up. Actually, Lei Xingfeng didn't just treat Lei Exine Yao as his little sister. He treated Lei Exine Yao as his own daughter. One must know that he was a reincarnated person. Even if he was young, he had the heart of an adult. Wu Yang and the others asked a few more difficult questions before stopping. After Lei Xingfeng finished eating, he said, Is there anything else at home? Gucci said, Nothing. Everyone is cultivating. There's nothing wrong with the base. Everything is running well. Lei Xingfeng said, I'm going to stay in paradise for a long time. I'll be leaving after coming back to take a look. Wu Yang said, Don't worry, just go. You just have to come back once in a while. Right now, the secret door is running well. We need to store as much materials and energy as possible. Gao Yi said, A few large energy mines have been discovered recently. Many people are mining them. So there are only a few people in the mirror world recently. Thunderstorm laughed and said, It's been very quiet recently. After chatting with the others for a while, Lei Xingfeng returned to the canyon of Nameless Peak. There was nothing in this canyon. There were no words or pictures on the cliff, and no materials. So Lei Xingfeng quickly returned to the formation. After walking back and forth, Lei Xingfeng found that he had almost finished exploring the formation. At this time, Lei Xingfeng began to hesitate whether to continue. He knew that this was his limit. If he continued, his strength would not be enough. After hesitating for a long time, Lei Xingfeng finally made up his mind. He would leave this place temporarily and wait until his strength increased before continuing. So he left the coordinates in a canyon and opened the mirror world. From the mirror world, he went out the Nameless Peak. Looking at the Nameless Peak in the distance, Lei Xingfeng could not help but shake his head and sigh. This time, his harvest was too great. Not only did he obtain materials and energy, but he also obtained the 9 seals combined technique. This technique allowed Lei Xingfeng to completely understand the mysteries of seals. Even the 9 seals combined technique was not as good as Lei Xingfeng's own exploration. However, the 9 seals combined technique provided the correct path. If Lei Xingfeng added his own exploration, especially his understanding of seals, he believed that his own cultivation would be much stronger than the 9 seals combined technique. Lei Xingfeng already had a clear understanding of this. His understanding of seals was his greatest reliance. He also had a clear understanding of how seals were created. Back in paradise, Lei Xingfeng continued his search. He remembered the huge, ancient tree when he first entered paradise. He wanted to go and take a look. Along the way, he found some mineral deposits. However, Lei Xingfeng did not care. He had collected enough resources. If they were not top-grade ores, he did not have the patience to dig them out. After flying close to the ground for a while, Lei Xingfeng soon saw the treetops of the ancient tree in the distance. It was continuous like a mountain range. He did not know how big this ancient tree was. After flying for a few more hours, the ancient tree in the distance gradually appeared. It could be seen that this ancient tree had a main trunk and 6 or 7 secondary trunks. It stretched for hundreds of kilometers. He did not know how thick the main trunk was. Anyway, Lei Xingfeng could already see the huge trunk from his current distance. After flying for a few more hours, the entire tree had covered half the sky. However, Lei Xingfeng still had not reached the bottom of the tree. However, Lei Xingfeng could no longer continue flying. He saw countless seal nodes. In front of him were countless seal clusters. Lei Xingfeng stood still and began to observe carefully. Then he walked slowly along the edge of the seal and checked it all along the way. Most of the seals here were of the wood attribute. The wood attribute seals were not that powerful. However, he soon found that there were fire attribute and space attribute seals among them. Although there were very few of them, they could not be underestimated, especially the space attribute seals. Lei Xingfeng was even more careful. He knew how to use space seals. Of course, he knew how abnormal this thing was. After walking for a few days, he only walked a short distance along the edge of the seal. He slowly observed and speculated. After a few days of observation, Xi and Feng knew that this restriction didn't look strong, but it wasn't simple. If he was careless with his strength, if he didn't know about restrictions, he wouldn't be able to come out after entering. Fortunately, Lei Xingfeng was proficient in seals. Therefore, this level of difficulty was not enough to stop him. After Lei Xingfeng walked back for a short distance, he resolutely walked into the seal. This time, he did not release his true body. Although it was very dangerous, he felt that if he released his true body, it would be the real danger. Just as he stepped into the seal, countless seal nodes swarmed over. Lei Xingfeng's heart beat wildly. He immediately stood still and operated Lei Yin's space seal with all his strength. In an instant, he passed through the seal nodes and then gradually returned to the original point. Lei Xingfeng was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. The seal here was too sensitive. After standing there for half an hour, the chaotic seal nodes finally recovered. He tried to walk 2 steps. During these 2 steps, Lei Xingfeng was still operating the space seal to prevent the entire seal from activating. Gradually, he relaxed. Finally, he relied on the space seal and did not disturb the array. What a guy! Lei Xingfeng could not help but click his tongue. This was the first time he had seen such a sensitive seal array. It could actually detect his presence. Based on his current seal skills, he was confident that he could enter any seal array without being detected. Lei Xingfeng's progress was now very slow. In fact, he also knew that if it were any other cultivator, they would have directly barged in. The power of this seal was not enough to stop cultivators with 4 rings and above. However, he also knew that if he barged in, the outer layer was still fine. Once he entered the inner layer, the power of the seal would increase exponentially. At that time, it would not be something that someone of his strength could resist. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng did not intend to barge in from the start. He wanted to rely on his own vision and the space seal in Lei Yin to quietly sneak in. However, the sensitive seal array made this step very difficult. The key was that his progress was too slow. Lei Xingfeng had no other choice but to slowly move forward. He did not dare to move too quickly. The seal nodes here were as numerous as mountains. They were densely packed and were relatively sensitive. If he moved too quickly, even with the help of the space seal, Lei Xingfeng would not be able to completely block it. After walking for a short distance, Lei Xingfeng found an empty seal node. Immediately, his spirits lifted and he slowly approached it. Chapter 948. When Lei Xingfeng entered, he didn't even have time to observe his surroundings before he sat down on the ground. He couldn't stop panting, feeling extremely tired. After resting for a while, Lei Xingfeng started to observe the formation again. He started to look for a way forward. The way he walked just now really wasted too much time. Very quickly, Lei Xingfeng found a path that was relatively easy to walk on. He couldn't find a path that didn't have many restriction nodes for the time being. He walked all the way into the depths of the formation. Because Lei Xingfeng didn't touch any restriction nodes, the formation couldn't be touched. Walking in a formation like this, there was almost no danger. There were more strange trees in the surroundings. Very quickly, Lei Xingfeng discovered that these weren't trees, but huge exposed tree roots. Moreover, these tree roots were very well integrated with the formation, forming a strange wood element formation. There were also many trees growing out of these roots. The thick roots were like giant star pythons, making all kinds of strange postures on the ground. Lei Xingfeng even saw roots with diameters of at least 10 meters. It was so huge that it was shocking. There were all kinds of strange plants, all kinds of strange parasitic plants. There was no lack of top-grade spirit herbs. Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but pick them for his collection. He didn't need them, but Lei Xingyao would definitely like them. Therefore, his speed slowed down again. Lei Xingfeng simply started to pick all kinds of rare spirit herbs in the labyrinthine formation. This speed was even slower. However, with a harvest, Lei Xingfeng's heart gradually calmed down. There were also many wood element materials here, and most of them were rather precious. There was no lack of treasure-grade wood element materials. Lei Xingfeng felt a bit regretful. He didn't dare to bring Lei Xingyao here because he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to protect her. But looking at so many wood-attributed materials, his knowledge of wood-attributed materials was much worse than Lei Xingyao's. Lei Xianyao didn't even need to do anything. She didn't even need to recognize these materials. As long as she let Xiao Ling out, the precious materials wouldn't be able to escape. But Lei Xingfeng was different. He could only find a portion of the wood-attributed materials. Even so, Lei Xingfeng had obtained a large amount of wood-type materials, and he could use a small portion of them. No matter what attribute a cultivator had, when they reached a high level, they would use some materials of all attributes, mainly for the growth of restrictions. Lei Xingfeng was a lightning-type cultivator. His Lei Yin was indeed mainly made of lightning-type materials, but at the same time, he also needed a large amount of other elemental materials. The growth of restrictions did not only require a certain type of material. After walking for a whole 7 days, Lei Xingfeng would find 1 or 2 empty spots to rest, so he wasn't particularly tired. Luckily, there was a spatial restriction to replace the restriction nodes, so Lei Xingfeng didn't need to avoid the restriction nodes. Of course, in this kind of large restriction array, it was almost impossible to avoid the impact of the restriction nodes. This kind of high-level restriction array, as long as you entered, the restriction would react. It was just that Lei Xingfeng was too powerful. He controlled the spatial restriction. So even if the large restriction array sensed Lei Xingfeng's existence, it couldn't activate the large restriction array to attack him. This was the power of Lei Xingfeng. No matter how powerful the large restriction array was, if it didn't attack, it was as if the large restriction array didn't exist. Lei Xingfeng was almost unrestrained. In the large restriction array, as long as there were no special circumstances, there wouldn't be any danger. Although this large restriction array was huge, with the help of the spatial restriction array, Lei Xingfeng was getting closer and closer to the huge ancient tree. As for what was in the ancient tree, Lei Xingfeng didn't know at the moment. However, when he first came here, it seemed that no one tried to enter this place, and everyone went to the nameless mountain. In other words, someone must have suffered here and spread the news, so everyone ignored this place. However, Lei Xingfeng didn't care. He had spatial techniques, so there was less danger after entering. As long as he walked carefully, entering the inner layer was no problem at all. Lei Xingfeng stopped in his tracks, and he smiled bitterly as he looked ahead. There were fence-like roots, densely arranged, and there was no way for him to pass through. If he was in his true form, he could directly crash through or step on the roots to force his way through. However, he was in his true form now, so he couldn't force his way through. He could only take a detour. This gave Lei Xingfeng a lot of problems. He couldn't proceed according to the route he chose, which made Lei Xingfeng very unhappy. He could also see that once these roots were activated, a portion of them would definitely be crushed by the restriction array. He didn't know how long the restriction array had been in a quiet state, so the roots grew and became an obstacle for him. Walking along the fences formed by the roots, Lei Xingfeng soon found a small path that he could pass through. This path wasn't so densely packed with roots, so he could just barely walk. After passing through this root barrier with difficulty, Lei Xingfeng suddenly understood that this root barrier appeared because there were the least restriction nodes here. These roots grew slowly, and even if the restriction nodes crashed into them, they wouldn't be able to activate the restriction array. Then, the entire restriction array gradually adapted to the growth of the roots, forming this fence-like root barrier. Sometimes, thinking about it, it was amazing. One had to know that the restriction array here was relatively strong and difficult to deal with. After passing through this area, Lei Xingfeng saw huge roots that fell to the ground like crab claws. Each root was a few meters thick, and there was a huge hole below. There were even fewer restriction nodes here, forming some sort of empty space. This kind of place allowed Lei Xingfeng to heave a sigh of relief. Just in the restriction array, Lei Xingfeng obtained many good materials. Following that, Lei Xingfeng found a crystal-like root in one of the empty spaces. He broke off one to check, and was surprised to find that it was actually a wood-type energy crystal. Lei Yin kept a portion of it, and put the rest into his hidden Luan space. This discovery made him understand that each element actually had its own energy crystal. Lei Xingfeng thought that if he could get a space-type crystal, it should be able to greatly increase Little Kong's ability. Unfortunately, after going to so many places, the only thing he didn't find was a space-type crystal. These things probably rarely appeared. As he went forward, he found more and more wood-type crystals. Most of them were formed by the crystallization of the roots. Finally, Lei Xingfeng passed through the first restriction array. The restriction array here was like a tree's growth rings, with the gaps between them being empty spaces. On these empty spaces, there were many wood-type materials. Lei Xingfeng thought for a while, and returned to the mirror realm to find Lei Xingyao and bring her here. After Lei Xingyao entered, she was immediately shocked. She said, "Brother, this place makes me feel very close." Xiaoling also appeared on Lei Xingyao's shoulder. It was obvious that Little Kong was even more excited, making meaningless sounds. "This place is too good, Ying." Xiaoling waved her small arms and pointed not far away. "Go there, go there." Lei Xingyao looked at Lei Xingfeng and said, "Let's go take a look." Lei Xingfeng nodded. "Okay." The two walked along the empty space of the restriction array, and in a moment, they saw a huge white flower. Its petals were definitely more than a meter in diameter, and it bloomed close to the ground. Lei Xingyao's eyes lit up. She said, "Honey treasure." Lei Xingfeng said, "What?" Lei Xingyao said, "Xiaoling, you go take it." Xiaoling giggled and said, "Sure, sure." Xiao. In an instant, Xiaoling entered the restriction array. With her small body, she definitely wouldn't cause any reaction from the array. In an instant, she appeared on top of the huge flower. Lei Xingfeng looked on curiously. He saw Xiaoling quickly run to the center of the flower and dive in. After a few minutes, Xiaoling came out from the center of the flower. She smacked her small lips, looking very satisfied. Then, with a xiao sound, she appeared on Lei Xingyao's shoulder. Lei Xingyao laughed. "You ate it?" Xiaoling said, "It's delicious. Ying, I haven't eaten such delicious honey in a long time." Lei Xingfeng asked curiously, "Honey?" Lei Xingyao said, "It's spiritual honey. Such a huge flower, there's a honey bun under it. There should be about 10 gene of spiritual honey." Lei Xingfeng looked at Xiaoling's body. Actually, he knew that although Xiaoling looked very small, he couldn't use his previous life's experience to judge her. Not to mention 10 gene of spiritual honey. Even if she ate 100 or 1,000 gene, her body wouldn't grow so big. This Xiaoling should have a storage ability similar to the hidden Luan space. Lei Xingfeng said, "Little sister, you can move around in the restriction array and collect wood attributed materials. Wait for me to pass through this restriction array, then I'll bring you to the next one." Lei Xingyao laughed. "I can go in with you and pass through this restriction array." Lei Xingfeng said, "I can't do that. This restriction array is very dangerous." Of course, he wouldn't let his little sister take the risk, so he tried his best to dissuade her. Lei Xingyao giggled and said, "Brother, look." She directly walked into the large forbidden array, and in an instant, a layer of green halo appeared on her body, and she swaggered around the forbidden array. The moment she entered the formation, countless restriction nodes rammed into her. Every restriction node that collided with her disappeared in an instant. No matter how many restriction nodes there was no reaction from the restriction array. It was as if Lei Xingyao was a part of the restriction array. Lei Xingfeng was stunned. He said, "What the heck's so powerful?" Lei Xingyao giggled in the restriction array. She said, "Big brother, I'm a wood-attributed cultivator. I have Shaoling's help. I don't dare to speak about other restrictions, but once I enter the wood-attributed restriction array, it's useless against me." Lei Xingfeng immediately relaxed. He said, "That's good. Hee, you scare me." As he spoke, he also walked into the restriction array. Chapter 949. This time, it was Xianyao's turn to be shocked. She said, Brother, the restriction doesn't have any reaction to you." Lei Xingfeng immediately said smugly, "I also have my own special technique. Hey, if this restriction wants to discover me, it'll be very hard." Xianyao stared at the giant tree in the distance. After a while, she said, "This is a spiritual wood." Lei Xingfeng asked, "What's spiritual wood?" Xianyao sighed, "It's a higher-level wood attribute spiritual object than Shaoling, brother. You can still hide from the restriction now, but once you enter the inner circle, you won't be able to, then you'll be in danger." Xianyao's knowledge of the wood attribute was much better than her brother's. She could almost see through the restriction in this area and the power of the spiritual wood. Lei Xingfeng said, "I can't hide it." He immediately understood. Once he entered the inner circle, he would be targeted by the spiritual wood. Then the spiritual wood would attack him. At that time, he wouldn't be able to use his spatial technique. He could only release his real body to block. Then it would be really dangerous. Xianyao said, "But it's okay. I'm here. Brother just needs to go forward." Hearing this, Lei Xingfeng was stunned. He said, "This restriction, if the spiritual wood discovers me, I don't have the confidence to block it. I'll probably have to run. Since it's like this, we can only move around the outer circle." Xianyao said, "It's okay, just follow me." Lei Xingfeng smiled bitterly. "You're not joking. Are you serious?" He stared at Xianyao. Xianyao said anxiously, "Really, I wouldn't dare to say that." Xiao Ling on Lei Xingfeng's shoulder babbled, "Ying, I'm here, there won't be a problem." Xianyao said again, "How about I go in by myself?" Lei Xingfeng immediately became anxious. He said, "How can you do that?" "Okay, I'll go in with you." He thought about it, but still couldn't do anything. Since his little sister was determined to go in, he couldn't back down no matter what. Even if Xianyao had 3 true ring bodies, he still couldn't be at ease. Xianyao led the way in front, while Xiao Ling sat on Xianyao's shoulder, its small hands waving about, scattering specks of light. Perhaps others couldn't see it, but Xianfeng could see it clearly. Every light spot would hit a restriction node. Those restriction nodes would be hit by the light spots and turn around. In other words, Xianyao and Xianfeng didn't have any restriction nodes around them. Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but click his tongue. He said, "Shaoling, what kind of technique is this?" Xiao Ling giggled. As long as it's a wood-type restriction, I can control it." Lei Xingfeng was speechless. This was possible? Xiao Ling couldn't stop smiling. It was obvious that he was very happy. One must know that Xianyao had been talking about how strong her brother was. How strong her brother was. She had been holding back her anger for a long time. To be able to be stronger than Lei Xingfeng, he was very happy. He felt that this helped Xianyao vent her anger, but he didn't know that Xianyao wasn't jealous of her brother at all. Xianfeng, on the other hand, was trying to figure out what Xiao Ling had done to be able to turn the restriction nodes around. Lei Xingfeng felt that anything that could break the restriction nodes had to be taken seriously. If it was a lightning-type restriction array, then using lightning to hit the restriction nodes, would it be able to achieve the same effect as Shaoling? Before testing it, Lei Xingfeng didn't have such confidence, but looking at the light spots Xiao Ling shot out, Lei Xingfeng was very envious. This was also a technique, a very interesting one. Lei Xingfeng felt that he could try it in the future. As they walked forward, Lei Xingfeng felt incomparably relaxed. He didn't need to worry, he just needed to follow. What surprised Lei Xingfeng the most was that Xiaoling was really powerful. Along the way, there were many rare materials, many of which Lei Xingfeng didn't recognize, that automatically flew towards Xiaoling and were taken away by her. Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but praise, as expected of a wood-type spirit item. Xiaoling said angrily, "I'm not a spirit item. I'm Xiaoling." Lei Xingfeng immediately raised his hands in surrender, repeatedly saying, "Yes, yes, yes, Xiaoling, I was wrong, I was wrong." Lei Xingyao said, "Xiaoling." Xiaoling wrinkled her nose and snorted, but didn't continue to pester. Along the way, Xiaoling's looting was much more ruthless than Lei Xingfeng's. Relying on her innate talent as a spirit item, collecting wood-type treasures was as easy as taking something out of her bag. What made Lei Xingfeng the most speechless was that she really went wherever there was danger. The only places she didn't go were the few places that didn't have wood-type restrictions. These included fire, space, water, and a few earth-type restrictions. It was as if she innately knew where she couldn't handle and where she could be unrestrained. Xiaoling's methods made Lei Xingfeng admire her to the extreme. There were a few places that even Lei Xingfeng didn't dare to go. Xiaoling directly commanded Lei Xingyao to swagger over. Lei Xingfeng also benefited from this. One must know that he was also suspending Lei Yin. Once there was a need, Lei Yin would directly take it. Of course, whether it was Lei Xingyao or Xiaoling, they wouldn't stop him. After all, Lei Xingfeng only took a small amount, and they were all materials that Lei Yin needed. After so long of practice, Lei Xingfeng now understood that the growth of Lei Yin's restrictions required almost all kinds of materials. It was just a matter of quantity. The most important were lightning and metal-type materials, and the rest were auxiliary materials. Auxiliary materials were actually very important. With and without auxiliary materials, the growth of restrictions was completely different. So as long as Lei Yin needed it, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't stop him from collecting materials, no matter what they were. Following Lei Xingyao and Xiaoling, Lei Xingfeng received quite a few materials that he hadn't noticed before. Xiaoling was especially sensitive to wood-type crystals. There were a few times when they found large areas of crystallized tree roots. They were all excellent energy crystals. Lei Xingfeng only took a small portion of these crystals. Most of them were taken by Lei Xingyao and Xiaoling, especially Xiaoling. She took a large portion. Xiaoling's thoughts were that she couldn't wait to follow the restrictions and go in circles. However, Lei Xingfeng wanted to quickly enter the range of the spiritual wood. He wanted to see the situation around the spiritual wood. Because the restrictions here were like the growth rings of a tree, each circle was a large restriction array, followed by a circle of empty restrictions. If one entered in a straight line, the distance wouldn't be too far. Relying on Xiaoling's unreasonable methods, Lei Xingfeng and Lei Xingyao charged straight in. After about 10 days, Lei Xingfeng and Lei Xingyao entered the inner circle. Lei Xingfeng observed for a long time and couldn't help but shake his head. If he was alone, he wouldn't have continued. The restrictions here were getting more and more dangerous and powerful. He believed that he wouldn't be able to pass through. However, Xiaoling and Lei Xingyao didn't think so. Lei Xingyao insisted on entering, while Xiaoling ignored the restrictions. According to her, they were all trash. Lei Xingfeng could only follow. He couldn't just turn around and leave. He was sure that even if he left, Lei Xingyao and Xiaoling wouldn't. How could he be at ease? He could only follow. This time, it was clearly different. The restriction nodes crazily charged at them. A layer of light mist appeared on Xiaoling's body and instantly spread out. Very quickly, the restriction nodes lost their target and slowly dispersed. Lei Xingfeng followed, his heart filled with admiration. This was too powerful. The restriction nodes had become mere decorations and were of no use at all. Suddenly, Lei Xingyao stopped. She looked in front of her with a bit of fear. A human figure formed by tree roots stood not far away. It was more than 100 meters tall and was covered in dense roots. It looked like the shape of a person that had been entangled. Lei Xingfeng only took a glance and knew that this was the shape of a real body. The real body should have been destroyed. Lei Xingyao asked, "What is this?" A person? Lei Xingfeng said, "It should be. Let's go take a look and we'll know." Very quickly, the two arrived in front of it. As expected, the place where the roots were entangled was empty. Lei Xingfeng saw a pile of bones. There was a small gap between the roots. A real body wouldn't be able to reach in, but a real body's arm wouldn't be able to block it. Lei Xingfeng reached into the gap and activated his spatial technique. In an instant, a seal flew out of the bones and landed in Lei Xingfeng's hand. Lei Xingyao was shocked. "Big brother, what kind of technique is this? It can fly over without going to the side?" Lei Xingfeng played with the seal. It was a 6-layer fire seal. In other words, this was a cultivator with 6 true ring bodies. Unfortunately, he had already died inside. 6 true ring bodies, but he died here. Lei Xingyao nodded. Once the wood element kills, it's quite strong. Lei Xingfeng could see the burn marks on the inside of the roots. The fire element could actually counter the wood element, but in such a large formation, the fire element was countered by the wood element. This person was probably exhausted to death. To be able to rush to this place and be wrapped up by the roots, Lei Xingfeng thought that this person's energy had been used up. Otherwise, with the cultivation of a true ring body and the fire element, the roots wouldn't have been able to be controlled no matter what. Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't worry about that. Let's continue forward." Lei Xingyao said, "Okay, Xiaoling, continue forward." "Hee, it's all up to you." Xiaoling said proudly, "Don't worry. Leave it to me." "Ying." Lei Xingfeng smiled. "To be honest, this is the first time I've seen someone break seals better than me. Xiaoling, this is it." He gave a thumbs up and praised Xiaoling. Xiaoling was so happy that she didn't know what to do. She put in even more effort. The seals around them couldn't even get within 5 meters of her. In other words, she was relying on the light fog to cover a 10-meter radius. No seals could come close. Lei Xingfeng was completely relaxed. He didn't have to worry about anything. He followed, taking big steps forward. That feeling was too good. Lei Xingyao couldn't stop smiling. She couldn't help but praise Xiaoling. This little thing was too awesome. Chapter 950. Just like that, the two of them arrived at the last barrier. Once they passed through this barrier, they would truly enter the location of the spirit wood. After entering the last barrier, they didn't walk far before they saw all kinds of tree root sculptures. There were at least 4 of them, some standing, some squatting, and even one lying on the ground. As expected, these tree root sculptures were filled with bones. Lei Xingfeng collected the seals of the 4 dead people. 2 were fire seals, 1 was gold, and 1 was earth. Unfortunately, there was no wood seal or laying seal. If there was an ice seal or a water seal, it would have been good, but there was none. Among them, the gold seal had 7 seals, and the others had 6 seals. In other words, 1 true ring body cultivator and 3 true ring body cultivators had died inside. Lei Xin Yao clicked her tongue. "How many people will die here?" Lei Xingfeng said, "If we follow the barrier, we'll probably see a lot of people like this." Lei Xin Yao said, "This barrier is so powerful. Why didn't I feel it?" Lei Xingfeng laughed. "That's because you have Xiaoling, otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to run so far. The entire barrier wouldn't have been able to activate. No matter how powerful it is, it wouldn't have been a threat to us." Lei Xin Yao said, "Yes, Xiaoling is the most powerful. Hee. I wonder if Xiaoling can do the same to other barriers." Xiaoling said, Ying, you want to kill me?" Ying, I don't dare to touch other barriers. I'll die." Ying, it's very scary." Lei Xingfeng said, "Oh, it's only effective against wood-type barriers." Xiaoling said, "Of course, I'm a wood type. It's only effective against wood types. If you want me to touch fire-type barriers, Ying, that's just adding firewood. You're courting death." Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but laugh. That's true. If you're hit in a fire-type barrier, it'll be like adding oil to the fire, burning even more fiercely. If a wood-type spirit item was burned, it would be even fiercer than adding oil to the fire. However, no cultivator would dare to try it, nor would they bear to burn a wood-type spirit item. Xiaoling said, Ying, don't say such a terrifying thing." Xian Yao extended a finger and lightly touched Xiao Ling. Okay, I was just joking. Don't be afraid. Xiao Ling said, you have to be quick when you go out. If the spirit would shows its might, it'll be troublesome. Ing. Lei Xingfeng was shocked and said, you can't block it? No, you can't cover it up? Xiao Ling said, the last part of the journey, should be controlled by the spirit tree. If it doesn't want us to go in, then we can't go in. Lei Xingfeng said, all right, this spiritual wood is like you. It has spiritual intelligence. Let's give it a try. If it doesn't work, we'll turn back. Lei Xian Yao nodded. Okay, even if we can't go in, we've gained a lot from the outside. Lei Xingfeng nodded. This trip has already been worth it. Furthermore, he knew of Xiao Ling's abilities. In other words, this large seal would not be able to stop Xiao Ling. In that case, the treasures here had been predetermined. They could come and collect them at any time. This was a huge benefit. Xiao Ling giggled. If we can go in, it won't be of much help to you, but it'll be of great help to big sister Yao Yao. Lei Xingfeng immediately understood. That was indeed the case. He thought for a moment and said, I won't go in. Little sister, you take Xiao Ling in. I think we can succeed. If I follow, we might not be able to go in. Lei Xian Yao said, how can that be? Let's go together. Xiao Ling said, big brother is right. Ing, if he follows, we really might not be able to go in. Lei Xian Yao didn't understand. What? Lei Xingfeng said, if the spirit tree has intelligence, then it will be extremely uneasy if I go in. But you two are different. Yao Yao is of the wood attribute, and Xiao Ling should have a natural affinity with the spirit tree. As long as you don't do anything out of line, I believe the spirit tree won't stop you. At the very least, it won't be afraid. Xiao Ling's little head was like a chicken pecking at rice. She said, that's right. Ing, big brother can't go. Lei Xingfeng said, how about this, Yao Yao? You send me to the empty zone. I'll wait for you there. Lei Xian Yao hesitated for a moment and said, okay. The two of them left the last barrier. Lei Xingfeng stood on the empty zone and said, little sister, if there's anything wrong, don't hesitate. Just open the mirror realm and go back. There's no need to resist. Only then did Xian Yao bring Xiao Ling back to the restriction array, which was the last restriction array. Lei Xingfeng sat down cross-legged. He had a very bad feeling just now, and it only became better after they returned to the empty zone. He sat on the ground and looked at the barrier. He was very nervous, even more nervous than when he went into the barrier himself. He carefully observed the movement of the barrier nodes. The wind was calm and the waves were calm. The entire formation was silent, and there was no movement. The silence was actually good news. As long as the formation was not activated, then Lei Xian Yao would be fine. After about half a day, Lei Xingfeng finally relaxed. This meant that Lei Xian Yao had entered. Lei Xingfeng knew that if he and Lei Xian Yao were together, the barrier would probably explode when they got close to the edge of the last barrier. At that time, he wouldn't be able to do anything. He couldn't even guarantee Lei Xian Yao's safety. Thinking about it, Lei Xingfeng began to cultivate. This place wasn't bad. It was quiet, and no one could come here to disturb him. Actually, Lei Xingfeng knew that ever since he received a lot of resources, he could already advance. He still had 4 processed Lei Yins. These years, he had been cultivating them. Although he hadn't connected them to his own Lei Yin, he was very clear that these Lei Yins could already be used. In the past, Xian Feng had always been restricted by materials and energy, as well as training techniques. Actually, he had also found a way to level up, relying on his proficiency and restrictions. The way he chose wasn't any worse than the 9 seals as one technique, but after seeing the 9 seals as one technique, he changed his own way of leveling up. Only now did Lei Xingfeng sort out his way of advancing. Planning, thinking about the connections between barriers, thinking about the relationship between barriers, thinking about the relationship between barriers, thinking about the superposition of Lei Yin and Lei Yin, Lei Xingfeng was dumbstruck. He sat motionless, his eyelids drooping, as if he was asleep. However, his brain was working crazily. One idea after another, one idea after another. Lei Xingfeng's brain was better than in his previous life. It could be said that he had an eidetic memory. All kinds of barriers rolled around in his mind. He needed to find a suitable way to advance. Time slowly passed. A new way of cultivating appeared in Lei Xingfeng's mind. He slowly changed it. These ideas were compared to the barriers he had seen in the past. At the same time, Lei Xingfeng was also trying to figure out the barriers in other seals. He had obtained quite a number of seals. For these seals, as long as he had time, he would carefully figure out the barriers in them. For some seals, Lei Xingfeng even directly sent them into his Lei Yin for Shao Kong to disassemble. This way, he could obtain a lot of extremely rare materials to strengthen his Lei Yin. In the beginning, Shao Kong's speed of disassembling seals was extremely slow. However, by now he had disassembled quite a number of seals and was gradually becoming proficient. Therefore, as long as he obtained seals, Lei Xingfeng would send them into Lei Yin for Shao Kong to slowly disassemble. Therefore, for the first time, Lei Xingfeng had countless materials. This was the foundation for his advancement. It was like building a building. If there were enough materials and manpower, as well as a good blueprint, then the building could definitely be built. Lei Xingfeng was just one step away, which was the blueprint. As long as this was confirmed, he could begin his advancement. There were still a few details that had yet to be settled, and Xi and Phone planned to clear up the entire thought process, especially the details of the restrictions and the usage of the interconnected restrictions. He had to be clear on this, so that he would be able to use the lightning stamp to its fullest potential. Lei Xingyao and Lin Ling entered the place where the huge tree was. Until now, there was still no movement. Lei Xingfeng began to organize Lei Yin. There were quite a few small problems with the four Lei Yin together. If it was an ordinary cultivator, they would basically ignore these small problems. 1. They wouldn't be able to detect them. 2. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to solve them. There were enough materials, enough energy, and everything else. They were just waiting for Lei Xingfeng to truly start cultivating. Once it started, advancement would be a matter of course. Lei Xingfeng began to organize Lei Yin. Before, there were still some problems that were unclear, but after reading the 9 seals into one cultivation method, Lei Xingfeng clearly knew which restrictions were the most important, which were not, and which were auxiliary. There were also those that were connected and strengthened seals. Modifying Lei Yin's restrictions was a very easy thing for Lei Xingfeng. Ever since he learned how to modify Lei Yin's restrictions, he would study these restrictions whenever he was free. He erased many useless restrictions and kept the good ones. He could even inspire restrictions. This inspiration came from observing other restrictions. He realized that he could create similar restrictions in Lei Yin's. Lei Yin hung above Lei Xingfeng's head, but he could completely control Lei Yin. It was like food placed in front of him. He could eat it however he wanted. After cleaning up a portion of restrictions, strengthening a portion of restrictions, and organizing the entire restriction community, Lei Xingfeng began to cultivate. A large area of restriction community began to be produced. A huge amount of materials began to be consumed. No matter how much materials and energy were consumed, Lei Xingfeng didn't care. He could be said to be a super rich man now. The resources he had saved up were enough for him to squander. This time, Lei Xingfeng didn't control the speed of the restriction's growth. Instead, he increased the growth of the restriction community. He urged the restrictions to grow at all costs. The 4 Lei Yins finally began to unscrupulously stimulate the restriction community. In the past, Lei Xingfeng had been doing his best to control it. He didn't let the restriction community spread. He left a certain amount of empty space. This was mainly to leave room for advancement in the future. Chapter 9:51. Lei Xingfeng had seen AI Yao seal before. The chaos of the seal made him sigh in amazement. After reaching 6th ring, there was almost no room for him to develop. There was no room for the seal to form and develop. This blocked his path of advancement. If AI Yao wanted to advance to a 7-ringed true ring body, The only way was to use a large amount of precious resources to expand his seal. Using the space in the corners of the seal, he might be able to grow the necessary restriction communities. Of course, this was a possibility. He might succeed, but he might fail. According to Lei Xingfeng's calculations, AI Yao's chances of failure were very high. Even if he succeeded in reaching 7th ring true body, his potential would be completely used up and he would not be able to continue growing. 8th ring true body was an unreachable goal for AI Yao. This showed the importance of a good foundation. A good foundation would allow one to become stronger and smoother in the later stages. Large amounts of seals quickly appeared. Lei Xingfeng didn't even have time to check. There were too many. However, he wasn't in a rush. He took out a new Lei Yin and started connecting them. In the blink of an eye, this thunder stamp combined with his own thunder stamp. The thunder stamp, which had already been emptied of restrictions, was affected by the main thunder stamp and began to crazily produce restriction clusters. In an instant, the consumption of materials reached a peak. Not only was the material consumption great, but the energy crystals were also being consumed. Because he had enough resources, Lei Xingfeng was rarely extravagant. He activated Lei Yin without any care. This time's training was completely different from the past. Xian Feng had always been careful when he trained, but this time he was completely crazy with confidence. Not only did he have sufficient resources, the most important thing was that he had grasped the path to advancement. If one didn't take the wrong path, what did it matter if one walked faster? This was why Lei Xingfeng was so daring. Lei Yin's super development. Due to the suppression from before, the countless seal clusters seemed to have found an exit. Not long after, the new Lei Yin combined and successfully reached 5th seal. Lei Xingfeng also reached 5th ring true body, and this time was different from before. The new Lei Yin seal clusters grew to a dazzling degree. Large amounts of seals appeared. Under Lei Xingfeng's attention, there were no mistakes. This allowed Lei Xingfeng to completely relax. At this point, Lei Xingfeng had completely forgotten about time. He focused all his energy on Lei Yin and started to erase the seals that were obviously wrong. This was a very meticulous job. Even Lei Xingfeng didn't dare to be careless. Erasing useless seals sounded simple, but if he made a mistake, there would be a chain reaction that would affect the growth of good seals. However, Lei Xingfeng was very clear that these useless seals had to be removed. Not only did these seals occupy all sorts of good locations, but they also consumed large amounts of resources to grow. This was a huge burden on him. It would greatly affect his advancement in the future. He had to remove them. Patiently, Lei Xingfeng slowly erased the useless seals. In some places, he even had to continuously erase them until the useful seals grew. This process was extremely boring, but it had to be done. Lei Xingfeng gritted his teeth and persevered. He thought that it would be better in the future. Once the good seal clusters occupied the most important locations, the useless seals wouldn't be able to grow. No matter what, Lei Xingfeng had to persevere. This was a crucial moment. As the useless seals were erased, large amounts of good seals appeared. Lei Xingfeng knew that Lei Yin had entered a virtuous cycle. As long as he persevered, this advancement would be a qualitative change. Lei Xingyao came out with Lin Ling and saw Lei Xingfeng sitting on the ground with Lei Yin on his head. She didn't dare to disturb him. Lei Xingfeng sat there for more than 40 days. When he opened his eyes, he saw Lei Xingyao and Lin Ling looking at him. He couldn't help but smile. "When did you guys come out?" Lei Xingyao saw Lei Xingfeng open his eyes and smiled. "We only came out for 2 days. He, Xiao Ling, and I watched brother cultivate." Lei Xingfeng asked, "What did you find when you went in?" Lei Xingyao was confused. "We just found some materials and wood energy crystals. The quality was excellent, but we didn't find anything else. We even went to the spirit tree to take a look, but we didn't find anything, so we came out." Lei Xingfeng was curious. This spirit tree should have its own consciousness. "You didn't communicate with it?" Lin Ling was also confused. "I can feel its presence, but it doesn't seem to want to communicate with us. Of course, I can feel that it doesn't have any ill intentions." Lei Xingfeng nodded. No ill intentions. Then it doesn't have good intentions? Lei Xingyao said, it already has good intentions. Otherwise, we wouldn't go in and out casually. I can see that it didn't attack us. Lin Ling said, there are a few places we didn't go. Every time we wanted to go, countless branches would grow from the ground and block our way. Lei Xingfeng said, that's okay. It's not an attack, just a block. If it didn't listen, then there would be a problem. Lei Xingyao said, yes, as soon as there was a block, we immediately turn around. No matter how good the things were, we wouldn't go. We ran around and got quite a lot of good things, but we couldn't communicate with the spirit tree. Lei Xingfeng nodded in agreement. No matter what materials or energy crystals, it was better to communicate with the spirit tree. If the spirit tree was willing to accept Lei Xingyao, then it would be a real gain. Unfortunately, the spirit tree didn't want to communicate. What a pity! Xian Feng sighed to himself. He wondered if he would be able to conquer this place if he could merge the 9 seals into one, which was the 9th true ring body. He didn't know how strong a 9th ring body was. Lei Xingyao said, brother, let's go back to the mirror world. When we have time, I'll bring Xiao Ling and explore slowly. There are many things I need here. Lei Xingfeng nodded. Okay, let's go back. Even he hadn't expected that he would be able to ascend to the 5th ring true body during this period of waiting. The speed of his ascension had surprised him. Of course, he was extremely pleased with himself. He brought Lei Xingyao back to the mirror world. The two came out of the courtyard. Lei Xingyao said, brother, I'll go back first. She didn't want to waste a second and immediately left. Lei Xingfeng knew now that his little sister was the standard training maniac. Seeing Lei Xingyao leave, Lei Xingfeng returned to the wooden shed. Soon, a table full of delicious food was placed on the table. This made Lei Xingfeng very satisfied. Jean Depang was always very helpful. There was always food to eat. This time, there was really no one in the courtyard. The others were all busy with their own matters. Due to the fact that they had obtained the 9 seals into one technique, everyone was working hard, which was why Xian Feng didn't ask anyone to invite them over. He only cared about eating his fill and returning to his room. This was the safest place, which was why he fell asleep immediately. He slept for 3 days and 3 nights. During this time, his brain was about to burn. Even if he was very strong now, he still felt like he couldn't handle it. When he woke up, Lei Xingfeng felt refreshed. He didn't go out, but instead let out Lei Yin to clean up the useless restrictions. In these few days, Lei Yin's restrictions were densely packed, and it started to grow quickly. Lei Xingfeng knew that once they grew for more than 100 days, they would be very difficult to deal with. Now was the time to clean them up. After growing for a period of time, it was easy to distinguish between good and bad restrictions. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng's cleaning speed increased. Even if the restrictions were useless, they would still consume a lot of materials and energy. Of course, there would be no problem if they were cleaned up. If they were left behind, as they grew, they would continue to consume resources. This was something Lei Xingfeng couldn't tolerate. After one restriction group was cleaned up, another one was formed. There were more than 1,000 newly formed restriction groups. This time, it was definitely a big explosion, especially after Lei Xingfeng understood the principle. The restrictions in Lei Yin's body grew even more crazily and rapidly. Every Lei Yin had 100 restriction groups. The so-called restriction groups were the combination of about 10 restriction groups. Each restriction group didn't exist by itself, but was a large formation with a complex nature. When these large formations were linked together, they formed a restriction group. It was so complex that if one hadn't come into contact with restrictions before, or had only come into contact with a small portion of restrictions, they wouldn't be able to identify them at all, let alone erase the useless restrictions. After half a year of torment, Lei Xingfeng finally finished cleaning up. During this time, he only went to the wooden shed downstairs to eat something and slept in his room. The rest of his time was focused on cleaning up Lei Yin. It could be said that the combination of 5 Lei Yin had been polished extremely well by Lei Xingfeng. This foundation wasn't something that ordinary cultivators could achieve. At this point, Lei Xingfeng already understood that he wouldn't have any bottlenecks if he continued to advance. As long as he had enough resources, he could even advance to 6 ring immediately. Even advancing to 7 ring wouldn't be a problem. After carefully checking the materials and energy he had collected, Lei Xingfeng discovered that it was completely enough for him to advance to 6 ring true body. In other words, he just had to stack another Lei Yin. After hesitating for a moment, Lei Xingfeng still couldn't resist the benefits of advancing. He directly started advancing to 6 ring in his room. This time, he could be considered to have advanced continuously. Advancing from 5 ring to 6 ring wasn't a big problem. The resources consumed were also bearable. However, advancing to 7 ring and 8 ring required resources. Even Lei Xingfeng wasn't sure. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.